turn those lights on, and then we turn this light off. So there you go. Welcome, everybody. How you doing? It's Saturday evening. We're still kind of in a pandemic, I guess, so you're stuck with me. You're not out partying and dancing and drinking. But that's okay. That's okay. I'll do my best to entertain you and make you happy. Got a few things to talk about with you here tonight. Should be a fun conversation. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. And the way we do it is the way we always do it, where I give my opening remarks. Then from there, we do our roll call, where I call you out as I see you, names and locations. And then I answer your super chat questions. Your super chat questions. They are very, very important to making this show happen. I will answer those super chats. You give me a super chat, I will give you an answer. That's how it works. I'm wearing a summer shirt because it does feel like summer outside. However, it is allergy season like crazy. So I've got lots of unnamed diet water right here, the famous clear liquid that is very good for you if you are having allergies. So I will be sipping the unnamed diet water throughout the show in order to keep myself properly hydrated. But yeah, that's the way we do things. Opening remarks first, then the roll call, then the super chat answers. So for the opening remarks tonight, which I got a couple things I'm going to talk about with you. Not going to give you a big speech, an epic speech to, bring the house down. But then sometimes I say that and I end up doing that. So, you never really know. Just a couple things I came across today in my reading that I thought I might want to just bring to your attention. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell so you find out about the next one we do here. Now let's jump right into it. Folks, unfortunately, I subscribe to a neoliberal publication called The Economist. I am a subscriber to neoliberalism, economic neoliberalism, expressed in a publication called The Economist. And as you can see, they're pushing anti-Russian hysteria on the cover, as they often do, if not anti-Chinese hysteria. Putin's next move, and they've got him, bum, 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 and it's all scary, and you're supposed to be terrified, It's like, you want to make a liberal nervous, you just got to buy this, right? And walk up to them and say, hey, and then they'll go, ah! And run away, right? You're just going to see a liberal coming. I'm just kidding. They're not that dumb, but you would think so. Maybe Rachel Maddow. That would probably work on Rachel Maddow, right? Say, hey, Rachel. And she would just jump back, right? She sees this image of Putin and Russia, and she's just terrified. Ah! It haunts them in our dreams. But anyway, there's this thing I've done. I've done this before with The Economist. In the front of The Economist, they have their news roundup. On the first, they have their world news this week, the world this week, politics, and then they have the world this week, business. And so I've gone through it, and I have a little commentary to make about a number of the items on here. So I'm just going to kind of give you the highlights and what I would like you to know about various news items that The Economist has decided to fill us in on. So I've gone through it here. Not going to comment on every story, but I will comment. I'll read you what The Economist says in their quick summation of a couple sentences, and then I will tell you what's really going on. So there we go. That's how we'll start out. So, of course, the first story, this is what they tell us. This is The Economist. Vladimir Putin uses his State of the Union speech to warn the West against crossing the red line, saying that this would trigger swift and tough response. Tensions have risen following the imposition of additional sanctions by America in response to alleged political meddling in Russia. By Russia, Mr. Putin has amassed troops on Russia's border with Ukraine, though it's not clear what he aims to do with them. Well, here's what you need to understand, folks. Ukraine used to have an elected government. The elected government of Ukraine was a government that was friendly with Russia, did business with Russia, had its own interests as well, and whatever. And in 2014, the United States funded protests by violent extremists and admirers of Stepan Bandera, people who think that the Soviet Union was wrong in World War II and the Nazis were the lesser of two evils. Those folks violently overthrew the government and installed a far right-wing extremist government in Kiev. Now, in response to that, the people in the eastern regions of Ukraine, the people in Donbass, people on People's Republic of Donetsk, People's Republic of Luhansk, those folks declared independence, and they established independent republics. And at this point, we have seen the Ukrainian government escalating its hostility toward the people in the eastern republics. It has escalated the shelling of those people and the targeting of those people. So the people in the eastern regions who speak Russian in their homes, who sympathize with Russia, many of them are members of the Communist Party or members of the Party of Regions, and they have a very different view of Ukraine's history. They don't get along with the government that was violently installed by the United States in the Euromaidan coup. Those folks have been facing an escalation of hostility from the Ukrainian government backed up by the United States. Now, that's what they're not telling you. So based on that, they're alleging that the Russian government has built up a bunch of forces over Ukraine's border. They're not telling you that Ukraine is escalating violent attacks against its own population, efforts to economically strangle its own people, etc. And that Putin is right there on the border, sending a message that, these people in the eastern regions, you can't slaughter these folks. Now, that's the part of the story you're not hearing. Right? And the USA recently tried to overthrow the government of Belarus. Belarus, an anti-imperialist socialist country led by Alexander Lukashenko. Lukashenko and Russia don't exactly get along all the time. They've got strong differences with each other. But Lukashenko, they recently had an election, and U.S.-backed protests destabilized the country and almost brought down the government. And, again, that was another government that we already have the USA destabilizing and overthrowing the government of Ukraine, and then we have what happened in Belarus. Did the United States waste money on the space program? All right, wrote it down. Waste money on space program. All right, wrote it down. That's a question. Now, so we already have, the USA violently overthrows the government of Ukraine in 2014, has a fanatical regime there that continues to menace and threaten the people in the eastern regions. Plus, now we've got the USA trying to violently overthrow the government of Belarus, of course, Russia is there trying to stabilize the situation, negotiating with the protesters, etc. So Putin, is saying, look, we don't like the USA having provocations on our borders. We don't like the USA imposing sanctions on us based on unproven allegations. Oh no, Russia meddled in the elections. How exactly did a few bots and trolls meddle in the elections? Did anybody think that the election results this year were somehow impacted by some alleged Russian bots or trolls? That's ridiculous. That's just absolutely ridiculous. I mean, we're waiting for any evidence to be provided. They've got high confidence Russia meddled in the elections, as if the United States doesn't meddle in elections all over the world. So that's the first item there. Indigenous people embrace pro-growth socialism. Very good question. Writing it down. That's how this works. I write down the super chat. So then the next item that we've got here in The Economist, right? At the time, concerns for the health of Alexi Navalny, Russia's leading opposition figure, who is in prison on hunger strike. Thousands of Mr. Navalny's supporters responded to Mr. Putin's speech with demonstrations in several cities. Well, folks, Alexi Navalny is a criminal, right? William Z. Foster on China. Alexei Navalny is a white nationalist, according to the New York Times. That he most absolutely is a white nationalist, according to the New York Times. And on top of that, Alexei Navalny, is basically being pushed by Western media to destabilize Russia with protests, But you're not hearing any of that. He's just an opposition figure. There are many people in Russia that are opposition. They got the Communist Party that's opposition. They got the Liberal Democratic Party that's opposition. There are many critics, but Navalny, who is an ethno-nationalist, who has been on video calling for the extermination of certain groups in the Caucasus regions, this individual who's just been selected by Western media as their favorite Russian dissident. That's what's going on there. Americans' politics polarized. U.S. politics polarized. Alrighty. Next, Germany's Greens choose Annalena Baerbock, who is only 40, as their candidate for chancellor in September's election, wrong-footing Angela Merkel. Well, you know what's particularly interesting? So, okay, Biden, Indian genocide. You know what's particularly interesting about the Green Party in Germany? The Green Party in Germany in the 1980s, they were much more progressive. They were actually, a party that was more critical of NATO, more critical of the United States. They wanted better relations with East Germany and with the Soviet Union. But the Green Party of Germany is at this point probably the leading voice beating the drum against the pipeline, Nord Stream 2. You can't have capitalism without racism. All right, the Green Party of Germany basically wants the Germans to pay for their natural gas, not to just pay for it to come over the border from Russia, which would make sense, but instead to import their natural gas all the way from the United States. That's what they're lobbying for at this point. The Green Party of Germany doesn't want the Germans to buy their natural gas from just over the border in Russia, with the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Instead, the Green Party wants the Germans to pay to import their natural gas from American fracking companies. You can't make this up. A party that calls itself the Green Party is basically a shill for American fracking companies. You can't make that up. Right? So the Green Party of Germany, the hippy-dippy environmental party, has become the party of American fracking companies. It's saying to the Germans, don't buy from our Russian neighbors. Oh, no. Do what the Americans want. Import natural gas all the way from the United States from fracking companies. Because that's what America wants, and Western media says that Russia is bad. So that's what we got to do. And of course, now the Green Party of Germany is getting a big boost, right? Suddenly, they're considered, one of the more fringe parties in Germany. But now the Green Party of Germany has got a big boost all of a sudden, because they have become the shill party of American fracking companies, of American energy dominance, a party pushing to try and kill the Nord Stream 2 pipeline and make the Germans pay way more money for their natural gas because America thinks Russia is bad. This is basically what they're doing. The German Green Party is basically turned into anti-Russia shills, and that's what they are. And it's pretty unbelievable. And of course now, now they're getting way more press. Oh, look how interesting they are. We're going to do features on, they're not being treated like a small third party now because they are who the American and British establishment has put their chips behind in their anti-Russian efforts. And that shows, by the way, how non-Marxist progressivism, right? When you're not anti-imperialist, when you're not anti-capitalist, when you're just doing that progressive thing, man, it leads to a lot of confusion and shilling. I think this problem goes back even further. When the Green movement became, shills against the nuclear power, right? Nuclear power was good for the Soviet Union. They needed to regulate it more and control it. But overall, green power, nuclear power was a good thing in the Soviet Union. Nuclear power is a good thing for Iran. Nuclear power is a good thing. But big oil companies want to destroy, nuclear power. And, when the big oil companies started, funding and backing the green protest movement against nuclear power, that was kind of a turning point. And in my book on the synthetic left, I've talked about this. I've done extensive research about, how the Communist Party, at first they supported nuclear power, and the same for other communist groups. They realized the problem wasn't nuclear power, the problem was capitalism, the problem was corruption, but nuclear power in and of itself is not a bad thing. Look, I mean, if you think that nuclear power, right, it's one thing to say you don't trust capitalist corporations to run nuclear power plants. I'm with you 100%, right? Corporations are certainly not trustworthy, and they're trying to make a profit, and they're skimping on safety. I'm with you on that. It's another thing also if you say that we need to have tighter regulation of nuclear power. Again, with you 100%. We need to regulate them, make sure they do it in a safe way, 100%. But when you start saying things like you can't split an atom to make electricity, that's like playing God. No, it's not. All right. China, India, COVID. That's ridiculous, right? And the same, I will say, with GMOs, right? Now, I am all for not trusting Monsanto. Monsanto is an evil corporation, an evil capitalist corporation that is ruthless and has destroyed the lives of working people in South and Central America. They were heavily involved in a coup in Uruguay where they removed a left president. And, I mean, Monsanto is a ruthless corporation. So I'm totally against Monsanto. But is there something inherently evil about GMOs? No. Right? It's possible that maybe we shouldn't trust the corporations and how they're doing it. Fair, right? We should want more regulation, right, to make sure, and we should require them to test them to make sure that I'm with you. When you start saying that GMOs are inherently bad because you can't mess with genetic, no, right? Again, you're not Marxist at that point. That's not Marxism. Okay, Hegel. All right, someone was asking me about Hegel. All right. Hegel. I haven't read those books they mentioned, but they asked about Hegel, so we'll talk Hegel. Right? Monsanto is an awful corporation. A lot of the nuclear power companies in the United States are pretty awful, but nuclear power is not inherently bad. Okay? Nuclear power is not inherently bad. It's just a form of power, and if we could make it better, if we could get to fusion, right, we would basically solve our fossil fuel problem. We'd liberate humanity from the chain of fossil fuels. And the same for genetically modified foods, right? I don't trust Monsanto. Monsanto is an evil corporation. Tiananmen, we'll talk about that. It's an evil corporation, but there's nothing inherently wrong with the genetically modifying foods. There's nothing inherently wrong with that, right? It's just that we don't trust the corporation. We ought to be absolutely clear about that. But the green movement has always been sketch to me, honestly. I'll just tell you. And I met many green environmentalists over the years that were Malthusians, that thought there were too many people in the world. I've met many green environmentalists over the years who think Marxism is hogwash. Look, we have an environmental problem, and the problem that we have is that capitalists do not care about the long-term impact of their decisions, right? They just want to maximize their profits in the short term. And because of that, they don't use resources in a sustainable way, right? They don't use resources in a sustainable way. That's the problem. So you need a centrally planned economy. Okay, all right. Lenin on Stalin. All right, we'll talk about that. And then we got social Darwinists. Social Darwinists. All right. All right. That's the problem. The problem is we need a centrally planned economy so that we use resources in a sustainable long-term way so we don't have ecological problems. That's the issue there. The issue is capitalism. And if we can have a centrally planned economy, get off of fossil fuels, get to higher modes of production, we can get over climate change. But there is a certain current that certainly doesn't see it that way. That says human beings are like a cancer. They're always expanding. They breed too quickly. They use too many resources. There's too many people in the world. Growth is bad. Technology is bad. You know, and now the fact that the German Green Party are shills at this point for American fracking companies just tells you everything you need to know. Everything you need to know. Big oil. Let me just tell you this. Big oil has had its finger in the green movement for a long time, right? And, you know, in the 1980s, when we saw that huge escalation of anti-nuclear protests because big oil was afraid. I don't know enough about that one you sent there. I just don't know anything about that. Fakio. I just don't know anything about that. But look, the 1980s, when the green movement was just so focused on getting rid of nuclear energy, it was so obvious they were working for big oil companies and for the Eastern establishment. That's what they were doing. They were trying to get rid of nuclear power because it would put them out of business. They were also trying to establish an intelligence connection in the Eastern Bloc. You know, there was coordination. Anti-nuclear activism in the Eastern Bloc was coordinated with the Green Movement in the United States, and the Green Movement has been corrupted. And this is just the latest example. Look, American big oil and American natural gas companies want to sell Germany natural gas. They don't want the Germans to buy natural gas from Russia. So Russia is about to finish this pipeline, the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, and so they can start buying their natural gas from Russia. And now we've got the German Green Party, oh, we object. You know, this is ridiculous. But anyway, moving on. Enough about that, right? There's a lot on here that doesn't relate to Russia. Hong Kong. Jimmy Lai, a publisher and critic of the government in Beijing, I'm continuing from The Economist, was sentenced to 14 months in prison for participating in pro-democracy protests in 2019. Four former opposition politicians were also jailed. Yeah, right? That sounds awful. That just sounds so awful, right? The rotten, evil Chinese government. This man just participated in a demonstration. They were having a demonstration, and he just walked in and said, gee golly, I'm going to join the demonstration. And the evil Chinese government said to him, 14 months in prison. Bum, bum, bum. It's so awful. I mean, isn't that awful? I mean, it's just, oh my God, aren't you angry? The evil Chinese government, all he did is participate in a demonstration. Folks, these demonstrators in Hong Kong were armed. They shot police officers. They lit them on fire. This was an armed demonstration. They attacked random people on the street. They seized, I mean, look, we're flipping out about what happened on January 6th. You remember January 6th on the U.S. Capitol? That was like every day in these Hong Kong protests. We're mad about January 6th and the Trumpers, running around the Capitol and trashing Nancy Pelosi's office. Why isn't China allowed to be mad about months and months and months of violent insurgency in the streets of Hong Kong, where people were bombing and destroying things and lighting people on fire and beating up random old women in the streets? I mean, give me a break. Look into the details. I bet you didn't know that during the Hong Kong protests, they actually had a cop killer app that was created. Bet you didn't hear about this, but there was an app on the Google, on the Apple Store that would tell you exactly where the police were. So if you were a violent Hong Kong separatist, you could find the police. Oh, there's a cop coming up the street here. Let's all get together and attack him. The level of violence, right? We think that the Capitol riot on January 6th was just so violent. I mean, these Hong Kong protests didn't go on for one day. They went on for months and months and months. They were out there with the Trump flags. They were out there with Pepe the Frog. And they were violent. They were extreme. They destroyed property, beat people up, lit people on fire. They seized the airports. This is my favorite, right? Go try to have a protest in an airport. Go try to do that, right? And I mean, when they started having those protests against the travel ban, I knew that was coming from above. Nowhere is more regulated than airports, right? You can't film in an airport without a permit, okay? You can't, so go try to have a protest in an airport in the United States. But these Hong Kong separatists, not only did they protest, but they protested inside the airport for extended periods of time, harassing people inside the airports, right? UK's invitation for all the Hong Kong protesters to immigrate to, I don't know about that, Kinky. I just don't know about that, all right? But I'll write it down. Hong Kong protesters immigrate to UK. Yeah. So we're led to believe that this individual, Jimmy Lai, that he participated in some demonstrations, and the evil Chinese government is going after him. It's like look at what these protesters were doing, okay? And it wasn't one day, it was for months and months and months and months. If somebody was doing that kind of thing over here, a sustained, violent campaign, I think there would be a response. But that's not the way you're supposed to see it. Next item from The Economist. Xi Jinping said that countries which are bossing others around and interfering in internal affairs will not be well received. I wonder what country he's hinting about. Talking about the United States, as you know. All right, Tibet. Annex. Wrote it down. All righty. The Chinese president made his comments days after America and Japan pledged to cooperate on resisting China's territorial claims in the East and South China Seas. Folks, you have to understand economics if you want to understand the world, right? I just told you about how there's this dust-up in German politics because the United States doesn't want the Germans to be buying natural gas from Russia. Well, now there is a dust-up in the South China Sea because the United States wants to be able to threaten China, right? China needs to import oil. That is a weakness they have in China, is that they have to import oil. And most of the oil that China imports comes on oil tankers in the South China Sea. And because of that, the South China Sea is very important. So China has to have the ability to make sure that at no point can the United States block oil from coming into China. The United States can't be enabled to have the oil veto over China. China needs to secure the South China Sea. CIA interventions, strategy, books. Right? The United States needs and is trying to be able to threaten China via the South China Sea. So China makes sure that the South China Sea is secure, and it has military in the South China Sea. Now, here's the thing, right? The United States has over 800 overseas military bases. Russia has 8. China has 1. It's in Djibouti, okay? Now, the U.S. military is all over the South China Sea. Meanwhile, is the Chinese military in the Gulf of Mexico? No. Is the Chinese military off the coast of California in the Pacific? No. Is the Chinese military, are they near the harbors of New York City? No. However, the U.S. military is all over the South China Sea, basically trying to send a message to China that if at any point, your economy, if you make us mad, we can cut off your oil supply and we can bring your economy to a grinding halt. I mean, we can make the lights go off on the mainland. It's a threat hanging over hanging over China from the United States. The United States is threatening China by having a huge military presence in the South China Sea. So China builds up its military presence in the South China Sea to say, look, and thank you, Andre, basically to say, look, we will defend it. And if you try to do that, United States, we're going to stop you, right? The United States, look, Taiwan is China. Taiwan has been China for thousands of years, right? Since before Christopher Columbus came to the United States, Taiwan was China. And, it's Chinese-speaking people. It's a Chinese civilization, right? Taiwan is China. And, right now, during the Chinese Revolution, Chiang Kai-shek lost the Chinese Revolution, so he fled to the island of Taiwan. He set up the government on Taiwan, the Republic of China, right? That's the government on Taiwan is the Republic of China, right? Chinese mainland, you have the People's Republic. So at this point, there's an understanding that, okay, Taiwan is China, right? China's mainland is China. It's one country, but they've got, 2 different governments. Fine. But the United States has been really working very, very hard to build up Taiwan separatists, people who say that Taiwan is not China. They want to declare that Taiwan is not part of China and basically pick apart China, right? Part of the way the imperialists were able to keep China down for so many years was by dividing it, right? Deng Xiaoping talks about, all right, this one, taxes, all right, Chore, all right, Deng Xiaoping talks about how China was a heap of loose sand, before the Chinese Communist Party came in, right? The local warlords, and it was just chaos and instability. And that's how the imperialists were able to keep China down, was by having it not strong and centralized, right? And that was, I mean, in the 1920s, Edgar Snow went there during the famines, and he saw, people starving to death. And part of the reason they were starving to death was because there wasn't a strong central government. There was not a strong central government that could coordinate famine relief. And that having a divided China has been one of the key ways the imperialists have kept, China down. So uniting China, right? Having one China has been very, very key. And so, the USA building up separatists in Taiwan that play up the idea that Taiwan is not part of China. Taiwan, it just has a different heritage, etc. Right? That's very, very dangerous. The USA gives lots of weapons and is arming the government on Taiwan. This is all leading to a very bad situation. China needs the South China Sea for their oil. So this is all, again, you would read this and you would think that China is just being, this is ridiculous. But no, I mean, the United States is playing an aggressive game and not very smart. So next item in our world politics summation. The jury found Derek Chauvin guilty of the murder of George Floyd during an arrest in Minneapolis last year when the policeman knelt on Floyd's neck for 9 minutes. Yeah, folks, all my life, especially when I was in college, but other times, I've heard these people that say protesting never accomplishes anything. Nothing is ever achieved by protesting. Nothing. And protesting doesn't accomplish anything. Nothing good ever happens with protesting. If you want to change things, you got to write a letter to your congressman. If you want to change things, just go vote in November and register people to vote. But don't protest. Don't organize. Don't demonstrate. No. Change comes through just normal, boity. Well, look, as I watched that verdict that went down, let's just be absolutely real. As I watched that verdict that went down, think about if all the people that had taken to the streets last summer, all the people that protested, all the people who got arrested, all the people who were very provocative in their demonstrations, imagine if all those people had just written a letter to their congressman. Do you think Derek Chauvin would have been convicted? I don't. Imagine if all those people who had taken to the streets and all of that had just waited until November and voted for a candidate. Do you think things would have changed? I don't. Look, it's pretty clear. Protesting has an impact. Look, folks, I was going to court with police brutality victims in Cleveland. You can go read articles. Cleveland Scene magazine did a profile on me. Oh, goodness gracious. Do I have to tell the whole story? I might just have to tell you. Well, I'll summarize, right? So, 2010, I was involved, 2009, 2010, I was involved in I was an activist in Cleveland. I was involved in different activist stuff. And one of the things that I did as an activist in Cleveland was I would go to court with victims of police brutality on the East Side. There was an amazing organization. I think it's still around. I don't know. I haven't been in Cleveland for years. But there's an organization called Black on Black Crime Incorporated, headed by Art McCoy. Art McCoy was an owner of the Superfly Barbershop, a well-known community activist and organizer in Cleveland. He has a radio show, and he was framed up. He was sent to prison at one point in the 1980s, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. And he's just a beloved figure in the black community in Cleveland, Art McCoy. And he has this organization called Black on Black Crime Incorporated, which is a nonprofit that's about bringing peace to the black community and bringing, community empowerment. And they worked around police brutality issues, and they worked around it relentlessly. Every Wednesday, they had a meeting, for the group. It was just, they worked relentlessly, and anybody who was really involved in struggles for justice in Cleveland, they had some relationship with Art McCoy and with the Black on Black Crime Incorporated. I mean, look, you would go to their Wednesday night meetings, and the Workers' World Party would be there, and the RCP would be there, and the New Black Panther Party would be there, and the Nation of Islam. would be there, and local Christian pastors would be there, and local, Muslim mosques would be there, and I mean, there were things that were pretty wild. I mean, there'd be incidents where there'd be gang wars going on, and there'd be activists that were involved with Black on Black Crime Incorporated that would go and negotiate, a truce and stop the gang wars. I mean, it was kind of amazing, and anyway, it was just an amazing dynamic group. And, I was involved with one particular family that was struggling against police brutality, and I went to a lot of their court dates and such, and they had the idea that I should go leaflet, with somebody else at a high school, talk about police brutality. So we leafleted at this high school, and we heard about a student walkout. My friend and I, we heard that there was going to be a student walkout. So we went to the high school on the day that the student walkout was happening. And the police just brutalized these young women, these two young women who walked out of school, one of which was 18, so she was allowed to walk out of school, right? The other of which was her younger sister, so she was technically escorting her, so they didn't even break the law, right? But regardless, the police beat up these two young women. But luckily, I was there, so I filmed the whole thing with my little camera. So we sent it to the local news. It's a horrendous act of police brutality. So after we did that, my face was all over the news. It was like, they made it sound like I had organized the protest, which I had not done. This scary communist guy, and they had me on the news like in slow motion with my like beard, and I was wearing a leather jacket, and it was like, this scary communist guy or something. But actually, the local news did a story about me, it was, the mother of the victims of police brutality spoke on my behalf, and actually, the young woman was acquitted in juvenile court. The cops beat her up and then tried to charge her with assault, and Terry Gilbert, who was an amazing lawyer, just an amazing lawyer in Cleveland, who took police brutality cases all the time, Terry Gilbert, he'd worked on the defense of Leonard Peltier, he represented her, and they were acquitted. The young woman was acquitted in juvenile court. It was great. And I'll tell you, I was, at this time in Cleveland, I was heavily involved with struggles around police brutality, right? I was going over to the east side of Cleveland. I was at the Justice Center all the time, and I was definitely involved in police brutality related struggles. And this was 2009, 2010, I was doing this kind of activism. And while it was going on, I would tell people that I went to college with about what was happening, and they would say, that's not real. This is a good country. America's a great country. Our police aren't racist. Tell my family members about it. They didn't believe me. Oh, police brutality, that can't have happened. It was amazing. I mean, nobody had any belief. I mean, the black community, they knew what was going on. They absolutely knew what was going on, what the black community was facing from the police all the time. They knew what was happening. People involved with the legal system knew what was happening. But there was this denial about the issue of police brutality all throughout U.S. society. There was this huge denial of the issue, that it wasn't a thing. People believed those Law and Order TV shows about cops, that they believed it, and people didn't want to hear it. But, things have changed because people took to the streets, because they protested. The understanding of police brutality, that police brutality is a reality, that racism, continues to go on, of mass incarceration, that there is widespread understanding of this now due to activism, right? People know about this because of the hard work of a lot of people who wouldn't let this go, who didn't just go vote and didn't just vote for their, write a letter to their congressman, but actually, took to the streets, but actually made it their mission to raise awareness of this. Things have changed largely, right? There's widespread awareness of police brutality. There's widespread awareness of the prison industrial complex. And that's a very good thing, right? So don't let anyone, look at the Derek Chauvin ruling. And don't let anyone give you that, protesting doesn't accomplish anything. Go be a Democrat. Don't be a Marxist. Don't be a socialist. Don't be a revolutionary. Go be a Democrat. Don't let anyone tell you that stuff. Don't let anyone give you that speech. Don't let anyone give you that garbage, right? Look at the Derek Chauvin verdict and say, oh, no. Oh, no. What the leftists, what the communists, what the black community, what the black revolutionary organizers have been saying for so long, now everybody recognizes that it was true. Everybody recognizes it. Everyone recognizes that they were right. Something that was only, believed by people that were considered marginal in U.S. society is now widespread. We're having a national conversation about police brutality. Now, I wish that we could have the conversation in a different way, personally. I think that if we could have the conversation in a way where we recognize that as capitalism is entering a crisis, as wages are dropping, the police state is coming down even harder. We're marching toward a low-wage police state, and of course, it is coming down hardest on the black community and historically oppressed communities in the United States. But it's a widespread problem, and that that there are white people that are facing this now as well, and the whole working class needs to unify in a class struggle against the emerging low-wage police state. That's the kind of way I would like to have the conversation about police brutality. I would like to have the conversation about police brutality be a conversation where we recognize, the special oppression that people endure, but at the same time, we view it as a class-wide issue. An injury to one is an injury to all. We view it in the context of the billionaire bankers and bosses and their drive for a low-wage police state, and the struggle of working families for justice and working people against the imperialist and capitalist system. That's the way I would like the conversation to be framed. I would like us to avoid, for example, I'll just be real with you all. I'm real with you all. I'm not a grifter. Okay, if I was a grifter, I wouldn't say this. If I was a grifter, I would not say what I'm about to say because it's not what people want to hear. But I'm not a grifter. I'm going to tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. And I'm just going to be real with you. The term white privilege, okay? It's a true concept, right? What they're pointing to is real, but the term is not scientific, all right? Music with occult themes. It's not a scientific term, right? It points to a real phenomenon. White people in the United States, we do have it easier than black folks. The police treat us better. We're more likely to get hired at a job. That's all true. But it shouldn't be called white privilege, because what happens to black people is something that should not happen to anyone. No one should get shot for reaching for their wallet. Nobody, right? No one should face discrimination in hiring. Nobody should be, not having economic opportunities. Nobody. The things that the black community face, on the part, because they're black, right? They face racial discrimination. They face economic, hardship. They face police brutality. These things shouldn't happen to anyone. It's not like it should be happening to everyone, and white people just have this special privilege because they're white and they don't get it. No, these are things that shouldn't happen to anyone. The position of the Marxist movement is that a job is a right, that housing is a right, that, economic exploitation should end, right? That no one should face police brutality. No one should face discrimination. So if we are trying to end all of this, we shouldn't be calling it a privilege. We shouldn't be talking about white privilege. When you start talking about privilege, suddenly the conversation shifts. Suddenly the conversation, Mongolians, suddenly the conversation shifts away from, some people are suffering and the whole working class is under attack, and it affects some communities more than others, obviously. And then it shifts to this conversation about some people have it too good. When you go to people and you tell them that they have it too good, they get defensive because no one ever thinks they have it too good. And we need to get rid of the word white privilege. We need to acknowledge the concept of white privilege, right? The concept that black people face discrimination, that black people face racism. That's what we need to do. We need to acknowledge the concept, but we need to drop leftism, equality in mediocrity. We need to get rid of that word. The phrase white privilege, I don't think it's a good word. And the fact that we're having a conversation about police brutality is a really good thing. But we're having the conversation about police brutality with the concept of white privilege, and that makes it not an issue of class struggle. That makes it a question of who has it worse. Who has it worse? Who has it better? Who has it too good? And this is the problem. Folks, when the pie is only this big, when the pie is only this big, The only way your slice can get any bigger is if you cut into somebody else's slice, right? That's the only way your slice of the pie can get bigger, if the pie is limited. That's just a fact, right? If the pie is only this big, the only way your slice can get bigger is by cutting into someone else's. And that is toxic, because no one ever thinks their slice of the pie is big enough. Human beings naturally want more than what they already have, right? They want to expand. That's the way humans are. We grow up, we work hard, we have children, right? We build civilizations, we invent technology. Human beings are by nature an expanding creature. And if you declare that the pie is only this big, you are inevitably going to have all kinds of divisions in society. Why? Because everyone wants more than what they already have. But at the same time, the only way they can get it, if you declare the pie to only be a certain size, the only way they can get it is by cutting into someone else's slice. And that is the basis of the problems we have. We need to have the mindset that the pie is unlimited. We need to have the mindset that there is no limit to growth. There is only a limit to profits. There is only a limit to the irrationality of the capitalist system. That is the mindset we need to have. That is the mindset we need to have. There is no limit to growth. There's only a limit to profits. There's only a limit to capitalism. But there is no limit to growth. The achievements of human beings, the drive of human beings to create, to expand, to interact with resources differently, that drive is unlimited. And with socialism, we can unleash that drive to far higher takes. I don't know who that is. I've never heard that name before, Red Illuminati. I just don't know who that is. All right. Now, next item from The Economist this week in politics. Joe Biden enraged some Democrats when he signed an order capping the annual number of refugees to America at 15,000, in line with the number allowed under Donald Trump. Mr. Biden had promised to increase the cap. Amid intense criticism, the White House said the order had been subject to some confusion, and the cap for the rest of this fiscal year would be increased, the number to be set on May 15th. Folks, where are these migrants at the border coming from? You know, this is true. I mean, March, record numbers, 172,000 people piled onto the U.S. border. What's going on here? Capitalism. That's what's going on here. Socialist Constitution. That's what's going on here. Capitalism. In 2009, Honduras had a socialist president who was going to try to build up the lives of people. And instead, that leader was overthrown. They toppled Manuel Zelaya, CIA coup. Now Honduras has free market neoliberalism, and the people are in poverty. They have one of the highest murder rates in the world. Guatemala, 1953, they had a socialist president, Jacobo Arbenz. CIA overthrew him, put in a chain of military dictators, including the genocidal Rios Montt. Drugs as imperialist weapons, including Rios Montt. And these migrants are largely from Honduras and Guatemala, and they are desperately poor people. All across Honduras and Guatemala, you've got people who don't speak Spanish. They speak indigenous languages only. They don't read and write. They never have had electricity. They've never had running water. That's capitalism. That's neoliberalism. That's what it offers, right? This is the unregulated free trade. Meanwhile, you go to Cuba, they have universal literacy, universal education, they got power plants, they've got running water, they've used state central planning to build up the economy. You go to Nicaragua, the economy is booming in Nicaragua. They've got their micro-entrepreneur program led by the socialist government. They've eliminated illiteracy. They've just done amazing things, building new highways and roads. Every time I turn around, they are building new highways and roads in Nicaragua with socialism. At work, way late, just getting here, showing appreciation. But thank you, old gringo. I do appreciate it. Super chats are always welcome. But, you know, I mean, look at what's happening. I mean, in Honduras and Guatemala, where these migrants are coming from, they're deeply poor people in countries that have been devastated by free market capitalism, where the people are poor, the people are left destitute, and drug gangs, which go back to the 1980s when the U.S. government was arming them to kill communists and still using them to fight against, you know, the Sandinistas in Nicaragua. These drug gangs, armed with U.S. weapons, are running around killing people and murdering people. Honduras has the highest murder rate in the Western world. This is capitalism. All these migrants are coming. Next time anyone wants to tell you about how great capitalism is, say, really, you know, why did 172,000 people, you know, pile onto the U.S. border, risking their lives, only to be detained? Why I mean, look at the crisis on the border. People are so desperate to get away from free market, neoliberal, capitalist policies. It's that bad that people are taking that much risk to, you know, I mean, come on. Smear campaigns. I mean, and that's the side of the story that's not being told. Against. That's the side of the story that's not being told. That capitalism has created this crisis. Neoliberalism has created this crisis. And they're not fleeing to the United States from Cuba. They're not fleeing to the United States from Nicaragua. They ain't fleeing to the United States from Venezuela. They're not fleeing to the United States from Bolivia. Right? When countries have socialism, they have literacy programs. They have universal employment. They wipe out poverty. I mean, it's the anti-communist policies of the U.S. government for decades and decades and decades in Central America have led to a situation, a humanitarian catastrophe. And now those folks are piling into the United States. And they don't want to talk about why it happened. Well, we know why it happened. The Syrian parliament scheduled a presidential election for May 26th. The war-torn country is also suffering from a growing economic crisis, but President Bashar Assad is not expected to allow any serious competition. You know, that's the way they frame these things. The Syrian people overwhelmingly support the Syrian government. Syrians, not just in Syria, but all over the world, vote in their elections. This great famine caused by imperialism. By You know, I mean, Syrians overwhelmingly support the Syrian government, the internationally recognized Syrian government. And they have voted, the Syrian refugees have voted for Bashar Assad, and the Syrians in Syria and government-controlled areas have voted for Bashar Assad. Most evil presidents, right? Most evil presidents. Overwhelmingly, the Syrian people, you know, have supported the Syrian government. But we are led to believe that the terrorists and the extremists, the Wahhabis who want to set up, you know, a new Saudi Arabia in Syria, who are tied to al-Nusra and al-Qaeda, that they somehow represent the populations. And when Syria has elections amid their civil war, and the population shows that it supports the Syrian government and votes for the symbol of the Syrian Arab Republic, Bashar Assad, you know, we are told in the United States that it doesn't count. Oh, it's not a real election. It's fake. It's phony. Give me a break. For the first time in 6 decades, Cuba is no longer ruled by a Castro. At the Congress, the ruling Communist Party, Raul Castro stepped down as first secretary. His successor, Miguel Diaz-Canel, a 61-year-old apparatchik who became president, is the second most powerful in the job in 2018. Right? Yeah. There you go, right? The Cuban Communist Party at this point, you know, Raul Castro left the Cuban government a long time ago, but he was still the leader of the Cuban Communist Party, and he stepped down, right? Countries are moving on, and Cuba's changing. It's adopting market mechanisms. It's studying what Vietnam has done. It's studying what China has done. There you go. Old Gringo wants to be an infrared gorilla, so there you go. Yeah, there you go. I hope you have fun with that. All right. NASA flew a robotic helicopter on Mars, the first time that a machine from Earth has undertaken a successful flight. That's pretty neat, isn't it? Regulatory body in Brazil approved the emergency use of a cocktail medicine to treat mild and moderate cases of COVID. The country's death toll is at 380,000, right? Yeah, they always say, "Oh, capitalism is so great." Look at Brazil, right? Brazil, you had a social democratic president. You had first Lula da Silva, then after that you had Dilma Rousseff, but ever since, the coup where Michel Temer was brought into office, and then after that we had the rise of Bolsonaro, they have had neoliberal free market policies in Brazil. They have been taking apart all the social democratic apparatus. They've been, suppressing the labor unions. They've been just ruining the economy of Brazil. And it's been a free market country, right? Bolsonaro, who is tied to, anti-communist extremist groups. He's tied to the Reverend Sun Myung Moon and the Moony, wacky, crazy right-wing religious cult that runs the Washington Times. He's tied to paramilitary groups that assassinate communists and leftists and trade unionists. Bolsonaro, the right-wing extremist, has been running Brazil. And according to all these people who say capitalism, all of Brazil's problems were caused by socialism, which they never had socialism. It was like social democracy. It was never fully like Venezuela or anything like that. All of Brazil's problems are caused by socialism, they said. Well, they've had neoliberalism there. And what has Bolsonaro done since then? Bolsonaro has run Brazil into the ground, has just completely run Brazil into the ground. Ever since Bolsonaro came in there, it was supposed to be a neoliberal miracle. He was supposed to get in there and rescue them with free market neoliberal reforms. And what happened? Bolsonaro ran Brazil into the ground. I mean, the plane went down, right? And now everybody in the country says that things were far better when Lula da Silva was president. They had to put Lula da Silva in prison on a frame-up charge just to keep him from running for president. That's how popular Lula da Silva is. It's been proven that trial was a sham, and Lula da Silva is out of jail, and he's going to run. I mean, give me a break. If you want to know what free market neoliberalism has to offer, take a look at Brazil and how great things have gone under the Bolsonaro regime. Revolution equals new ruling class. Audiobooks and recommendations. Revolution. New ruling class. Audiobook recommendations. So there you go. Those were just some of the highlights that I wanted to give you from world events from The Economist. And before we end our opening remarks, we're getting into the first hour here, I wanted to just read you a very short selection from William Z. Foster. William Z. Foster, Pages from a Worker's Life. William Z. Foster, he has, this book, Pages from a Worker's Life. It's not like an autobiography. It's little anecdotes from William Z. Foster's life, little stories he would tell people on different topics. He has one on work, one on sailing ship days, one on being a hobo when he was homeless, agents of the enemy. He's got, party life, being in prison, it's William Z. Foster, the great American communist. This is his, personal anecdotes, his personal memoirs. There's a brief little anecdote here that I think I would like to read to people, because as I think about how we're starting to move toward having in real life events and building real organizational structures, this is very important. And this is a section from Pages from a Worker's Life, a brief section I'm just going to read to you before we go to our roll call. It's called Jimmy Higgins. William Z. Foster, he writes, in his book Jimmy Higgins, Upton Sinclair immortalized a basic and vital type that every participant in the trade union and revolutionary movement knows well. Jimmy Higgins is that active, rank-and-file element which the French call the militant. He is the type of tireless, devoted, disciplined, self-sacrificing, and brave worker, the very salt of the working class. Wherever there is hard, slogging work to be done, Jimmy Higgins is on hand. When the going gets tough and dangerous, he is always in the front line, inspiring the masses to struggle. He is the rank and file builder of every union, party, and other working class body. And his reward is simply the feeling of his proletarian duty well done. Usually he is quite unknown to fame or glory, except in the esteem of his circle of contacts who admire and love him. The Jimmy Higgins are the natural head of the toilers. All dynamic working class leaders have been of this category. It is especially among them that the Communist Party recruits its members. In making a communist of Jimmy Higgins, the party enormously increases his efficiency by teaching him the true meaning of labor's struggle, by infusing him with class consciousness, by transforming his primitive proletarian militancy into burning revolutionary zeal. I have always been inspired by the Jimmy Higgins militants. Their modesty, sincerity, selflessness, courage, and invincibility are the qualities of the great heart of the proletariat itself. My experience in the trade union and revolutionary movement has been lighted up by the innumerable devoted actions of these unknown but heroic working class fighters. Let one simple incident reveal Jimmy Higgins at this time in his post in the class struggle. It took place in the concluding phases of the bitterly fought 1929 strike in Gastonia, North Carolina, led by the National Textile Workers Union of the TUUL, the Trade Union Unity League. The strike was in a bad way. The union was being pretty badly smashed, and the mills were operating. The leadership was in jail on the charge of killing Police Chief Adderholt in his raid upon the relief headquarters. A reign of terror prevailed in the surrounding country. The gifted strike leader and songwriter Ella Mae Wiggins had been murdered by company gunmen on a public highway. Several organizers had been brutally flogged, and a vigilante gang had just raided the union headquarters and wrecked it. Although it was a situation of fierce class struggle. On the day in question, a few of us had been to visit the newly made grave of Comrade Wiggin, a few miles outside of Gastonia. And by the time we got back to the local union center, it was already quite dark. The vigilantes, a real KKK outfit, had threatened to return that night to finish wrecking the headquarters, and we had resolved to take measures of defense. As our Ford drew up to the union building, we were loudly hailed by a union picket. He was armed, but quite alone, and evidently entirely unafraid. I asked him if he did not know of the imminent KKK raid, and he replied that he did, and he was prepared for it. He did not seem to think it in any way strange that he, one man, had been given the dangerous task of guarding the hall. In the previous raid, the KKK had torn down the big union sign on the front of the building, but the workers had replaced it, and the picket seemed particularly resolved to protect it. In his southern drawl, he quietly told us that the man who should climb up to take down that sign would certainly die, no matter what happened to himself. And I had not the slightest doubt that he would have been as good as his word had the occasion developed. We scurried about and dug up a dozen other union members as guards, and for that night at least, the headquarters was safe. In the years that have passed, the figure of that lone union picket has stood out clear and bright to me as Jimmy Higgins at his best. It was such a valiant proletarian fighter who carried through the Russian Revolution and who are holding back the fascist legions in Spain and in China, and who will eventually, by their unconquerable spirit, put an end to capitalism everywhere. And that is William Z. Foster telling us to be a Jimmy Higgins. Very important passage. Be a Jimmy Higgins. Learn from William Z. Foster. Be like Billy Z. William Z. Foster, great revolutionary leader of the American working class. Pages from a Worker's Life. All right, folks, it's happening. It's happening. My grandfather started working on the railroad when he was 5. He was born in Kentucky and died in St. Louis, Missouri in 1976. Wow. Sounds like you had a great grandfather. A very, very great man was your grandfather, old gringo. Thank you. All right, folks, let's do names and locations. Names and locations. I'll call you out as I see you, and then we'll start hammering out these super chats, right? Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Kendall in San Diego. Balthazar in Oakland. PA, USA. David in China. John in Houston. Cole from Calgary. Chaya in Montreal. Brazil. West Palm Beach, Australia. Justin Wooten in Beijing. Old friend. Dorset, England. Ryan in Oakland, California. Mo in Toronto, Canada. Munich, Germany. Tristan in Maryland, good friend of the program. Troy in Missouri. Holly Horn in Queens, New York. Cleveland. Char Darling. Charlotte from Nassau. Welcome, Charlotte, good friend of the program. Jared in Virginia. Detroit, West Palm Beach. Henry in the mountains of Vermont. Shout out to you, Henry. Jackie in Seattle. Welcome, Jackie. Chicago, Adelaide, Australia. Montreal, city of MK Ultra. I didn't know that. Hawaii, Robert Webb. Welcome, Robert. Orlando, Florida. Los Angeles. Charlie from Glasgow, Scotland. John in Albany, San Diego. Rick from the Sticks. Tony from Oregon Coast. Chicago, Brazil. Kieran from San Diego. Paulo, NorCal. Sam from Washington State. Marxist-Leninist in Escondido. Okay, I don't know where that is. San Gabriel Valley, California. Very good. Springfield, Missouri. Los Angeles. Chicago. Branson, Missouri. Union County, New Jersey. Northern California. Richard in Tacoma. Hassan from Arabia. Joshua Tree, California. Kinky, good friend of the show. Welcome, Kinky. Tony from Tasmania. Dario and Tamara in Brooklyn. Welcome, Dario and Tamara. Clydebank, 95% of the people here are from liberal places. I don't know if that's correct there, Alfonso. Keep reading. Space City, I don't know where that is. Richie from Staten Island. Mohsen from Iran. Mexico City. Harry in Melbourne. Nashville, Tennessee. Steve in Southwest Michigan. Cincinnati, Ohio. Jenny Lynn. Jose in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Baltimore, Northern Michigan. Glendale, California. Nazaire from Covina. Jimmy in Philadelphia. Hello from Chicago. United Corporations of America, says Jared. Seattle, Julian. Juan from Mexico. Whoa. Okay, all right. Nate from Sydney, Australia. Indonesia, West Virginia. Very, very good. Yes, people are congratulating old Gringo on his grandfather. I.O. Hillary is in Manhattan. Welcome, I.O. Hillary. Beloved member of this community. Regular. Hello from Boulder, Colorado. Very, very good. Alex Gunn. Sarajevo. Wow, all the way from Sarajevo. It's a great mix of folks, isn't it? All over the USA, all over the world. Hola, says Zapato. Hola to you. Very, very good. Very, very good. Anybody else? Names and locations. Names and location. Very good. Very, very good. Anybody else? Names and locations. Names and locations. Folks, feel free to tweet this out. Put this on your Facebook. Put this on your Twitter. Put this on Reddit. Post this around. There you go. Kuala, Malaysia. Very good. Very, very good. Aloha. All right, folks. It looks like we're going to start. Before I answer the super chats, let me just say that there's going to be a very, very important web conference tomorrow. The Center for Political Innovation is having a web conference tomorrow, and it's going to be great. David Fox will be speaking from Australia. He'll be speaking about labor struggles and the union movement. It's going to be great. David Fox. There's going to be Dr. Michael Powelson from University of California. He'll be speaking about the Soviet Union and its role in defeating the Nazis in World War II. That's going to be excellent. So Dr. Michael Powelson. We're also going to have a panel about neurodiversity and the struggles faced by the autistic community. It's going to be great. My good friend Paul is going to be performing some communist folk music. It's going to be just great. The host is going to be none other than Peter Coffin. The legendary YouTube personality Peter Coffin will be hosting the Center for Political Innovation web conference. He will be the host. We'll have a great panel on neurodiversity with various speakers. We're going to have a great presentation from David Fox and a great presentation from Dr. Michael Powelson about the fall of the Soviet Union. It is going to be a kick-ass panel. The link is down below, so be sure to check it out. And if you haven't done so already, get your copy of We Are City Builders, the Center for Political Innovation Educational Manual. Get your copy today. It's a very important book laying out the perspective of the Center for Political Innovation. We're having web conferences, folks, but the time for web conferences is soon passing. We're on the brink of planning some in real life events. We're going to have some meetups around the country, and things are in motion. If you want to get involved with the Center for Political Innovation, shoot me an email. calebmaupin@gmail.com. Somebody else asked me what my PayPal was. That's my PayPal, calebmaupin@gmail.com. So I saw that in the chat earlier, just throwing it out there. calebmaupin@gmail.com. That's my PayPal. And that's also where you should email me if you want to get involved with the Center for Political Innovation, calebmaupin@gmail.com. So it's going to be great. Good times. Very, very good times. A lot of great things are in the works. I hope you enjoyed everything we got to say. And so now we're going to start answering the super chat questions, and then that's our show. All right. Did the USA waste money on the space program? Well, a lot of people think that because of the fact that the space program is tied in with the military-industrial complex, and there's certainly some overlap there. However, I am very positive on the space program. I think that the space program is a very good thing because it drives creativity, it drives scientific progress. The space program constantly requires people to invent new things, and so it's very, very good. What role will the police and military have in protecting socialism in the USA? Right. Role of police protecting socialism. So there you go. The important thing you have to remember about the space program is no one talks about this, but right before he was killed, John F. Kennedy proposed that the space program become a joint operation with the Soviets. John F. Kennedy wanted the USA and the Soviet Union to have a joint moon mission. He wanted to combine the scientists and the scientific research of the Soviet space program with the American space program. And if that had happened, think of how different world history could be, right? But the space program really brings out the best in us. It really brings out the best in us. As much as there's certainly an ugly side to Kennedy, the Bay of Pigs invasion and corruption and, a lot of girlfriends and, and all of that. His speeches gave a very different tone. He wasn't synthetic left. There was still some of that optimistic Roosevelt tone in Kennedy's speeches. Okay. Dave Rubin, Candace Owens. Peterson, Harris. All right, so, and you still had some of that optimism in his speeches. It's interesting, his brother, the younger Kennedy, he was shot. He was against the Vietnam War, and he was running for the Democratic primary, and he was shot. He was killed in 1968. And it's interesting because at the time of his presidential campaign, RFK, he picked a popular song from the Broadway musical The Man of La Mancha. It was kind of his favorite song. They were playing at all of his rallies. And it's a beautiful song. It's called The Impossible Dream. Go and listen to The Impossible Dream. I'm not going to sing it for you because I would butcher it. But go and listen to The Impossible Dream. That song kind of incarnates the spirit of what it really means to be a progressive, right? To dream the impossible dream, to fight the unbeatable foe, right? to bear with unbearable sorrow, to run where the brave will not go, right? To right the unrightable wrong. Yeah, I mean, it's just some beautiful stuff. He talks about, to be willing to march into hell for a heavenly cause, right? What I was reading you about being a Jimmy Higgins, that's really what you got from the Kennedy and RFK presidencies. Now, RFK never became president. He was shot. But, there was still an optimism. There was still some of that Rooseveltism, some of that Roosevelt progressivism. And, yeah, 10 years to get an apartment. All right. 10 years, apartment, car in USSR. So there was still some of that. And, I associate, okay, moon landing, fake. So there you go. There was still some of that. So there you go. All right. All right. Are there examples of indigenous people embracing a pro-growth socialism? Yes, and one of those is a person, and his name is Evo Morales. Evo Morales, the president of Bolivia, who calls himself a Marxist-Leninist and transitioned Bolivia towards socialism, is fully indigenous, and so indigenous that at his inauguration, he had an indigenous religious ceremony to symbolize his inauguration. He himself was indigenous, president of Bolivia, and he actually built roads all over Bolivia, and he was all about growth, and he was all about working with China to exploit Bolivia's mineral resources, all about growth. Just a pro-growth guy through and through. Very, very, very proud of his indigenous history, and in fact, his inauguration speech began with a moment of silence in memory of the great Che Guevara. Evo Morales. But the Sandinistas, look, the overwhelming majority of the people that are in the Sandinista government in Nicaragua are indigenous. And in fact, they have created indigenous territories, autonomous, more than half of Nicaragua is in autonomous territories that belong to the indigenous people. And those indigenous people in those territories are pro-Sandinista. So this notion that somehow growth is racist, that indigenous people don't want growth, that's propaganda, right? That's propaganda from Western media, and that's not the reality of the situation. Most indigenous people around the world have a pro-growth attitude. They want to go to hospitals when they're sick. They want their kids to have health care. They're proud of their heritage, right? And that's overwhelmingly true, right? And I mean, but the CIA is very good at finding these little sects, right, of very, very, very fanatical anti-technology indigenous folks and putting them on TV, and saying, oh, they're so pure. And those folks, there's a whole history of that. Read about what was done on the Mosquito Coast during the Contra War. Read about the roots of Ward Churchill and his ties to, CIA work in Nicaragua. Read about Tibet separatism, which we're going to get to later in the conversation here. So there you go. William Z. Foster on China. Yeah, well, you should read William Z. Foster's History of the Three Internationals, where he talks about the Chinese Revolution. There's a very good selection from it, where he talks about the role of Mao Zedong. That's very poetic. In my lecture, which is linked, which is on my YouTube channel. It's not linked below, but it's on my YouTube channel. It's called Mao and American Socialists. I quote William Z. Foster on China extensively. William Z. Foster was very pro-China, and there was a relationship. China condemned Earl Browder and congratulated William Z. Foster on the defeat of Earl Browder. When Foster defeated Earl Browder, the revisionist, Mao Zedong sent William Z. Foster a personal telegram congratulating him on it. So the Communist Party USA and China were very, their history is very closely intermingled. I gave a whole class on that. And William Z. Foster was considered probably one of the most pro-Mao and Mao-friendly people. In fact, on his deathbed, William Z. Foster called out Khrushchev by hailing the Chinese Revolution. On his deathbed, he was 80 years old. Khrushchev came to visit him in the hospital, and he started ranting in favor of China, in support of Mao. So there you go. Is the USA really as polarized, or is it just U.S. media? I think the polarization is real. U.S. media is exacerbating the problem. There is a cultural divide. Material conditions for workers in the U.S. getting worse, but not bad enough for revolution. Right. Very good. Material Conditions. U.S. getting worse. Evolution. You know, I think the U.S. is very polarized. There are deep cultural divides in the United States. There are deep, deep cultural differences, right? This is a very big country. I tell people in New York City that all. I grew up in a very small town in Ohio, very religious, very, I mean, people see things differently, right? Donald Trump had millions of Americans who voted for him, even during the pandemic and everything. And that yes, the country is very polarized. U.S. media plays a role in exacerbating that. And I think that there is a particular demonization of certain demographics in U.S. media, no question about it. And there's an exacerbation of these existing differences. So that's certainly a reality. But yeah, the polarization is there. There's big cultural divides in this country. This is not, the United States is not a nation, right? So anyone who calls himself a nationalist for the United States is delusional. This isn't a nation. There's not one national culture here. There's not one national identity. There's not even a common language. There's not a common language. There's not a common religion. The United States is a country, but it's not a nation. It is not a nation. All right. Biden recognizing the Armenian genocide. Well, look, the Armenian genocide is a reality. I mean, it's an absolute reality. Turkey doesn't want to hear it, and it shows that these kind of things are politicized. These kind of things are politicized, no doubt about it. All right. Shaming, weight, height, intel. Okay, next question. All righty. Can you have capitalism without racism? Well, I think that racial injustice is certainly, okay. Get rural folks into communism. All right, wrote it down. I think racism is certainly built into U.S. society, and it's an aspect of capitalism. In the United States, has been, for a long time, and most class societies will use some kind of prejudice or bigotry or oppression to try and push, and further kind of justify the inequalities that exist. So there's definitely a relationship. It's Malcolm X, I believe. He said, you can't have capitalism without racism. Show me a capitalist, I'll show you a bloodsucker. I think that's what the understanding is there. And look, who have been on the vanguard of fighting racism in the United States? It's been communists, right? The Communist Party USA that built the Civil Rights Congress, that fought for the Scottsboro Nine. So there you go. China-India relationship. Well, look, Modi, the leader of India, has thrown down in this trade war against China. Modi pretends to be a nationalist. He's fighting for the people of India. He's a Hindu nationalist, blah, blah, blah. But he's pushed neoliberalism. He's wrecked the lives of the farmers in India. And, China, very much, China doesn't care. Right? China wants to get the vaccine out there. They don't copyright it. Anyone who's capable of producing the Chinese vaccine, anybody who's capable of producing it can do it. There's no intellectual property on the Chinese vaccine. It's not copyrighted. There is no intellectual property, intellectual protections of the Chinese vaccine. And it's good for China if the people of India, are vaccinated. China is the most populous country in the world. India is the second most populated country in the world. And, China and India, China getting its vaccine to the people in India is a good thing, right? And it shows that, that attacking China, joining Trump's hostility to China and all of that, being hostile to China is not a good thing for Modi to do, right? Because China is a potential very good friend to the people of India. So there you go. Hegel. The person listed some books about Hegel. I have not read those books. I'm studying Hegel for the first time in my life. I've read summations of Hegel's ideas before, but I'm studying Hegel for the first time. I'm actually reading Hegel for myself. I'm reading Hegel's lectures on Christianity and his, concepts of history, and I'm learning from Hegel. It's a new experience. Hegel is new, but he was the inspiration for Marx. Marx was a young Hegelian, so I'm studying Hegel. Because I feel it's necessary, and I want to be able to speak about these things. So there you go. I'm enjoying it. I've got a volume of his lectures on Christianity, and I'm going through it on my way to work. I read a book on the subway. Every time I go to work, I study. right? I believe Lenin's wife, Krupskaya, said one should study before work rather than after work. And I think she's right, right? When you're on the subway on your way to work, or when, some people drive to work and they listen to, to audio while they're driving. Sometimes that's a good time to study is in the morning, when you're fresh, you're awake, it's a good way to do things. The Tiananmen Square incident. Well, I've written articles about it. I wrote an article, Tiananmen, Trump, and the American Psyche. How many books do I read a year? I don't keep track. I don't keep track of how many books I read a year. And I don't read, so that I can't answer that question. But as far as the Tiananmen incident, okay, it's an important thing. 1989, all across Eastern Europe, you are having the color revolutions where the governments, the Marxist-Leninist governments, there's, destabilizing protests in the capital. And then, a faction in the military that's pro-U.S. usually then overthrows the government and brings in neoliberalism. That's happening all over Eastern Europe, 1989. In China, you have the Tiananmen protests, and the protests are for democracy. Now, what does the word democracy mean? I mean, democracy is the word that's used in the Chinese constitution, right? When Mao took power in China, he called it new democracy. So, it's for democracy. And a lot of people in China in 1989 had grievances about all kinds of things. In the lead up to the Tiananmen protests, there was a widespread, episode of racism on Chinese college campuses. There were a lot of young Chinese college students who were racist, didn't want to go to school with black people. The Chinese government had a scholarship program where Africans were coming from Africa to study. And there were, in the lead up to the Tiananmen protests, there were a lot of Chinese college students didn't like black people, were racist. So they were lynching college, black people. Nicholas Kristof talked about that in the New York Times. So some of the students that gathered in Tiananmen Square were racist. Some of the students that gathered in Tiananmen Square and were neo-Maoists, right? They were, in fact, according to Harvard University and one of their sources, there were more pictures of Mao in Tiananmen Square in 1989 than there had ever been since the Cultural Revolution. So there were neo-Maoists that were in Tiananmen Square. So there was that. There were workers in state-run industries who didn't like the market reforms of Deng Xiaoping. They wanted more job security in the state-run industries. There were also, religious occultists and practitioners of strange Buddhist religious practices. There were clearly some people who wanted capitalism, and it was just it was a big gathering of people in 1989 who had a variety of different grievances against the Chinese government for all kinds of reasons. And this is how the CIA does color revolutions. What's the Green Revolution in Iran about? What's it about? Green. No one knows, right? It's just anyone who has a grievance against the Iranian government. 2008, 2009, the Green movement starts, and anybody who has any kind of grievance against the Iranian government comes out, right? Pahlavists, Islamists, Mujahideen Khalq, people who want to restore the monarchy, there you go. The Orange Revolution in Ukraine, right? I mean, this is how Gorbachev, right? Gorbachev did Glasnost. So all kinds of people come out, and this is how it works when they're just trying to create unrest, right? It's just they just foment unrest. They just foment unrest, and it's all kinds of disagreements, and it's all kinds of grievances, and everyone's just everyone's there, and then that sets the stage for the military to move behind the scenes. Now, what happened in 1989 in China was that there were a lot of people that had grievances against the Chinese government for all kinds of different reasons. Again, some of them were racists, some of them were labor union oriented, some of them wanted Western capitalism, some of them were involved with religious cults, some of them were neo-Maoists and hardliners, some of them were workers in state-run industries who didn't like the market reforms. Everybody who had a grievance assembled in Tiananmen Square, and the Chinese government let it go on for quite some time. And then there was a military incident elsewhere in Beijing, right? There was some kind of attempted military coup or something. Right? There was some kind of, and that fits the pattern. That's what generally happens in the Color Revolution, is that there's a protest going on that sets the stage for some kind of attempted military coup. So there was some kind of attempted military something that happened. Based on that, the actual military confrontation, Deng Xiaoping, declared martial law in the city, kind of like what they look on January 6th, the United States, there was an incident. Now the military's been in the capital. Well, There was, martial law was declared in Beijing. So according to all the witnesses, right? According to, Bruce Miles from the BBC, according to Nicholas Kristof, according to the WikiLeaks cables from the Pinochet government of Chile, the square was cleared peacefully, right? The students dispersed peacefully, right? There was not a big episode of mass killing in the square. What happened was there was a lot of killing afterwards. Following the clearing of the square, there were armed clashes and confrontations that took place in the streets surrounding the square. After the peaceful clearing of the square, there was a lot of killing. There were snipers on rooftops of buildings who shot at Chinese soldiers. There was a Chinese, military vehicle that was overturned. There were soldiers lit on fire. There were people running through the streets with chains. Chains and like baseball bat kind of weapons that were running through the streets in squads of 5. There was a huge episode of violence, and it was for about 2 weeks following the Tiananmen Square incident. There was a lot of violence. Now, and it was very tragic, and a lot of people lost their lives. Not all of those people were civilians, though. A lot of Chinese soldiers lost their lives. In fact, there were Chinese soldiers killing other Chinese soldiers. There were apparently incidents where there was military on military killing going on. So it was an ugly incident. But at the end of the day, though, the Chinese Communist Party stayed in power, and the attempted Keller Revolution didn't happen. The narrative that we always get about Tiananmen Square in Western media is that there were just a bunch of lovely, peaceful protesters in Tiananmen Square. They were singing Kumbaya, and the evil Chinese government sat there and went, "Oh, this can't happen," and got a bunch of tanks and ran them over. That's not what happened, okay? It's much more complicated than that. It's much, much, much more complicated than that. Far, far more complicated than that. And, the famous incident, right, of the young man with the flag standing in front of the tank, that was the next day. That was after the square had already been cleared. The next day, they had the military in the square, and that guy went to the square and did his thing and stood there. That wasn't in the actual clearing of the square. That's an important thing to know. That was the next day. And the whole incident, it was much more complicated than that. That narrative that both Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton repeated during the 2016 elections, that the Chinese government just, had a tyrannical fit of rage and ran a bunch of people over with tanks, that narrative, that is pure projection. It's pure projection. Because during the 1960s in the United States, there were a lot of hippies, right? They don't have hippies in China, right? I mean, they may have had like religious Buddhist kind of, folks, but that's not American hippies, right? That's very different in Asia. The college students who were racist, they were not hippies. The neo-Maoists, they were not hippies. There's a lot of different people, that were involved in those protests. But the idea that they were all like, singing John Lennon songs and Kumbaya, that's not what was going on, okay? So the students were not hippies. It wasn't the 1960s. And the government didn't just kill them in a fit of rage. There's a huge amount of projection. It's a huge amount of projection on the part of Americans, right? Americans want to frame events that happen all around the world as if they fit into what happened in U.S. society. It wasn't Forrest Gump, okay, in Tiananmen Square, all right? That's just not what was going on there. It was a different situation. And the idea, and that happened in the United States. Look, after the Kent State Massacre, there were many people, in Kent who said they should have shot them all. I grew up near Kent, Ohio, and I constantly heard people saying, every year, oh, the young people were disrespecting America. They should have killed them all. They should have shot them all. That's not what happened in Tiananmen Square, but that's something a lot of right-wing conservative Americans believe. So there you go, and that's just these folks they just again, don't project. What happened in Tiananmen Square was very sad. A lot of people lost their lives who shouldn't have lost their lives. It's a tragedy, and yeah, I mean that's what there is to it. And if you want to cancel me for that, go ahead. I mean, look, I'm just stating historical facts here, right? It's a historical fact that Chinese soldiers were killed in the aftermath of the fighting. It's a historical fact that the massacre there was not a massacre in the square, right? There was killing elsewhere, but there's not a massacre in the square. Like, come on now, but there you go. HRC was a Goldwater girl, never forget. Okay, there you go. Okay, Lenin didn't want Stalin to be his successor. That's because there's this document called Lenin's Testament, and that's a document that was published. It was suppressed. The Communist Party of the Soviet Union didn't want it out there. It condemns both Lenin and Trotsky. It calls Trotsky a windbag and says Trotsky couldn't lead, the Soviet Union because he was all talk and he was obnoxious, but he was not really capable of leading. He was a disruptive, problematic person. It also refers to Stalin as being too rude, and I guess there was an incident where Stalin called up Lenin's wife on the phone and screamed at her and threatened her if she didn't do what he wanted, and that really upset Lenin shortly before that document was written. But yeah, it's this, you can read it. It's online. Go read Lenin's Testament. I mean, it's this short document that was written as Lenin was sick and dying. And then basically it dumps on both Stalin and Trotsky. Yeah. And, I mean, it's funny that Trotskyites bring it up to bash Stalin because it says far more negative things about Trotsky than it does about Stalin. It does speak negatively of Stalin. It says a lot of negative things about Trotsky. So it's really bizarre, really, really bizarre that they've made it their thing. All right. Social Darwinists. Oh boy, social Darwinists, right? Social Darwinism is awful. It's a way to justify, basically social Darwinism it's like the bell curve. It's this argument that some people are just naturally better than others. And you shouldn't try to help poor people because then they'll breed more and then they'll send their bad genes, and all of this. And it's awful, right? And it doesn't take into account that circumstances affect people. It doesn't take into account that human beings are collective creatures and that, it's not just like, oh, you're just now born the way you are, right? There's what you could call genetic reductionism, right? This attempt to reduce everything in life to genetics. Right? Hey, why am I on here talking on YouTube? Must be my genes. It must be in my DNA that I'm a YouTube personality. Yeah, I mean, come on. That's not how it works. Right. That's not, I mean, some things, yes, you and what you do, and I've argued with this kind of people before, and I say to them, really, so is it in my genes to be a YouTube personality? And they say, well, no, YouTube isn't in your genes, and iPhones are not in your genes, but you're predisposed. Oh, I'm predisposed. I mean, it's just, yes, are there aspects of our personalities and our intelligence that are impacted by genes? Sure. Is everything impacted by genes? Absolutely not. The conditions people face, the kind of schools they go to, who their parents are, what kind of food they eat, where they live, the society they live in, the community they live in, experiences that they have. You are a product of your whole life, right? You're not a blank piece of paper. You do start out with something, right? We all start out with something, right? The mind is not a blank piece of paper. But at the same time, you are a product of your whole life and you're a product of the community you're in. So you can't reduce everything to your genes, right? And so, yeah, the social Darwinism thing, it's like, it's basically, it's funny. It's very similar to in ancient Greece, the myth of the metals. I don't know if you've ever heard of the myth of the metals, but in ancient Greece, it was believed that different social classes just had different metal in their blood. And that, some social classes were, they had this metal in their blood, and that's why they were meant to be kings and queens. And some people were meant to be slaves because they had this metal in their blood. And some people were meant to be craftsmen because they had this metal in their blood. Well, it's bullshit, right? People don't have different metals in their bloods. The Greeks somehow figured out that there was metal in your blood, which there is. We do have metal in our blood. And so based on that, they came up with this whole conspiracy theory that people, people's entire class position in the slave society of ancient Greece was based on the metals in their blood, and it wasn't true, but it was a way to justify the social hierarchy that exists, and that's what social Darwinism generally is, right? It's an attempt to justify the social hierarchies of capitalism. Capitalism is not eternal. Capitalism is very new. Long time before capitalism, we had feudalism. Before that, we had slavery, and the overwhelming majority of history of human civilization is what do you call it? Is a hunter-gatherer civilization. So the idea that it's in our blood, it's just in our genes, what class we're going to be in, and what kind of job we're going to have, what kind of income we're going to have. That's just so ridiculous. It is just ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. So, but it's interesting though that it's pushed by a lot of these new atheists, right? A lot of these folks that that are, new atheists that are kind of pushed by the liberals, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, people like that, they hinted that kind of thing. So it's important to point out that, you wouldn't really have the rise of the synthetic left is largely due to, the religious right getting a good punch in the mouth from the new atheists. And I remember this, under the Bush administration, Bush had this core of people backing him. He had the religious right, and he was moving, and the neocons and the religious right. And out of nowhere, suddenly Richard Dawkins is on C-SPAN, and books like New Atheism is out there, and the religious right got a good punch in the mouth. Right, the New York Times and the liberal establishment said, this Bush stuff, this neocon stuff, it's wrecked our relationship with Europe. It's made it hard for us to cultivate Muslim proxies around the world. And so the neocons were kind of pushed out by the establishment. And part of doing that was cultivating the new atheist movement. So the new atheist movement, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, people like that, they gave a very, very good punch in the mouth to the religious right, right? Jerry Falwell, Pat Robertson, people like that, and they deserved a punch in the mouth. They absolutely deserved a punch in the mouth because they were, pro-Israel and right-wing and imperialist and advocating wars and advocating non-thinking stupidity. So they deserved that punch in the mouth completely. But the punch in the mouth came from people, Richard Dawkins, his selfish gene. I've heard that the science behind that is actually pretty flawed. There are some very strong critiques of the selfish gene by Richard Dawkins. Sam Harris and these other people. So they kind of created a monster. But there you go. Excuse me. See, it's that spring allergies I was telling you about. All right, sorry about that. But anyhow, Hong Kong protesters immigrate to the UK. I really don't know what became of that, Kinky. Kinky asked about that. I really don't know what became of that. She asked about it. Tibet annexation. Well, it wasn't an annexation. What happened was that, Tibet, you had the Dalai Lama. Tibet is China. It's been part of China since, before Christopher Columbus came to the United States. It's, the 1400s. But, you had the Chinese Revolution, Mao made an arrangement, with the Dalai Lama. At first, they allowed the Dalai Lama to continue his reign. It wasn't until the early 50s, right? In 1949, at first the Chinese Communist Party, but there were uprisings among the Tibetan serfs. Most of the Tibetan people under the Dalai Lama were serfs. It was feudalism. It was a feudal system. And the monks lived off the people, and people had their eyes gouged out, and they had their fingers cut off, and it was a brutal, repressive, feudal system. And in about 1953, there were widespread uprisings among the Tibetan people, and it was Tibetans that dismantled feudalism. There's a very good book by Anna Louise Strong, When the Serfs Stood Up in Tibet. Who else was there at the time, was actually there and witnessed it? W.E.B. Du Bois. W.E.B. Du Bois, the beloved African-American intellectual, he visited it. And yeah, it was the slaves, the serfs of Tibet rising up against their masters. And it was Tibetans themselves that overturned and dismantled the feudal system. And then the United States fomented the Tibet Civil War and airdropped, fighters into Tibet. You can read all about this. There was a war in which hundreds of thousands of people died, the Tibet Civil War. It was all staged by the CIA. And it was a lot like what Reagan did in Nicaragua with the Contras, the Tibet Civil War. All right. CIA interventions, strategies, books. I don't know. I've talked a lot about Ward Churchill and his ties to the CIA and stuff, but, he did write a very good book called On the Justice of Roosting Chickens, in which he just has a list of all kinds of CIA interventions around the world. It's like a timeline, of U.S. regime change operations, U.S. CIA operations, just a timeline you can read about. There's also a very good book called Overthrow by Stephen Kinzer. And he talks about the overthrow of Mossadegh in Iran. He talks about the U.S. invasion of Hawaii and how the Hawaiian monarchy was overthrown. And it's Stephen Kinzer. He writes a very, very good book just about the various interventions. So there you go. All right. Why do people complain about taxes as a chore? Well, you pay taxes if you're working, right? It just comes out of your check. I think it's filing your tax return that people consider to be a chore, right? I think that's what the people consider to be a chore. But generally, if you're working like a regular job with an employer in the United States, you're paying taxes all the time. It's just coming out of every check. It's your employer, renders it, from your check, and then you can appeal that and get a check back. That's generally how it works. So, and I mean, yeah. Has Brave New World come true? There's some truth in that. Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. It's a version of 1984 that's a little bit different. Aldous Huxley, he writes about this futuristic world in which people take drugs all the time. They're like high on drugs to control them. In which all art and beauty has kind of been lost, and people just watch sex and violence. Um, yeah, and it's this person from an Indian reservation or an indigenous reservation comes into the brave new world and sees this world of people that are just on drugs all the time and have lost their humanity because they're just so kind of brainwashed all the time. It's an interesting book, and there's a lot of truth in it. That it's a way of social engineering and managing people certainly happens. Music with occult themes. Well, I don't know, like when you talk about music with occult themes, okay, so like obviously Stairway to Heaven, comes to mind. A lot of people think, think that song was inspired by Aleister Crowley. Um, um, Iran hostages. There's various, I think, what is it? Ozzy Osbourne has, songs about Satan and stuff like that. But then there's also, you can go back to Wagner, right? I mean, the Wagner ring cycle, which I've been to it's all about it's a Norse, it's a literally pagan occult, story. It's Norse mythology. It's the story of Wotan and, right? Wotan and Siegfried and, and I mean, it's occult mythology, right? And it ends with the whole world bursting into flames. So I don't know. I mean, when you talk about occult, right? When you talk about the occult, you're talking about different things. So there's Satanism, right? And Satanism, Satanism typically refers to, there was an individual by the name of Anton LaVey. And he was a man in the post-World War II era who started, calling himself a Satanist. He would appear on American television. He wrote books. And he was an advocate of Ayn Rand, teachings. He was a libertarian, basically. He was a libertarian. So if someone says, when I say libertarianism is satanic, that is not hyperbole. It is literally satanic, right? I mean, it is the satanic religion, promotes Ayn Rand, virtue of selfishness, no government intervention in the economy, let poor people starve, compassion is weakness, right? This Hollywood, I mean, I don't know what he was. He was like an organ grinder at a carnival, and he became, the Satan guy, right? But what's interesting is that many people point out that Anton LaVey, the founder of the Church of Satan, this like libertarian who goes around, doing seminars with rich people who pay lots of money to listen to his lectures and hear his lectures about why to be, pros and cons, outsourcing. All right. This guy, this guy, right, was very much, he was like a new version, right? He basically was improving on the career of somebody named Aleister Crowley. And Aleister Crowley was an individual in the early part of the of the 20th century. Aleister Crowley was this guy who entertained rich people, and he entertained rich people with magic and the occult and stuff like that. He didn't call himself a Satanist. He did have his own teachings. He was, what is it? Thelema was his. It was a religion he started called Thelema, which was inspired by like ancient occult teachings. It was like, but it was the same kind of thing, right? The teaching is, what is it? Do as thou wilt, right? Like find, do as you want, right? There should be no moral consideration. Just do whatever you want. And that's like the satanic trend, right? It's rich people getting entertained by, I don't know, like philosophers. You want to call them philosophers who do weird rituals and tell them they don't have to have any compassion or kindness and they can do whatever they want and they can be sociopaths. And, there is a disproportionate amount of people in the U.S. ruling class, right? And people that own banks and factories, that are sociopaths. And so these kind of flim-flam men come along like Anton LaVey or Aleister Crowley, and they're very good at, they develop kind of this ritualized, this pseudo-religious way of convincing, people that they can be sociopaths, right? Ayn Rand did that. She didn't call it a religion. She called it a philosophy of objectivism. But Anton LaVey did it. He called it a religion of Satanism. And before that, Aleister Crowley did it, and he didn't call it a religion of Satanism. He called it his own religion, Thelema. So that's one version of what you can call occultism. Okay, and that's what I would put in like the satanic thing. But there's also paganism, right? And paganism just refers to pre-Christian religion. Before the Roman Empire brought Christianity to Europe, there was a lot of different religious practices. Christmas was originally the Yuletide holiday. All the Christmas traditions are the ancient Germans celebrated Yuletide to worship Odin. And it was a Christmas celebration, and even Santa Claus is based on Odin. I've done lives about this around Christmas time. There's also May Day, right? It's been Easter is largely the reinvention of May Day. But May 1st, May Day, the ancient Germans and Gauls, and they would dance around a maypole. There'd be this pole, right? And you've probably seen it before, a pole with a lot of ribbons around it, and kids dance around it and stuff. Well, that was to celebrate, I don't know how explicit we can get here, but it was to celebrate, the male phallus, right? And it was, springtime was a great time to have babies. And May, they had this festival of procreation and celebrating, procreation, basically. And that the ancient, Europeans had this big festival to celebrate, procreation, right? So, there are like pre-Christian practices, and I don't put that in the same category as I would put the Satanism stuff. The Satanism stuff, the do as thou wilt, do as thou wilt, Anton LaVey, Aleister Crowley stuff. That stuff is, the evil of capitalists being kind of commodified, right? Traditional religion encourages people to be kind to one another and have compassion. Well, a lot of the ruling class don't want to hear that, so they practice, they find various preachers who tell them the opposite. The pagan stuff is a little bit different. Paganism really kind of became a trend, though, during the overthrow of feudalism, because the Catholic Church was the main institution of feudalism in Europe. In the French Revolution, for example, many of the French revolutionaries did practice some pagan traditions, right? Freemasonry has pagan implications in it, and it was kind of this feeling that, like, as we're trying to overthrow the Catholic Church, we're trying to develop a society with more freedom, we're going to draw from some of the traditions. Many people talk about, for example, the song Joy to the World, right? It's a Christmas carol in the United States, Joy to the World, right? There's nothing particularly Christian about it, right? I mean, look at the lyrics. It was written in like the 1700s, and at the time that there was among the capitalists of Britain, there was kind of probably a trend of Freemasons and folks that were exploring pre-Christian ideas. And if you listen to the lyrics, it's kind of this like worship nature, God is in nature. It's not really a Christian song, right? The lyrics are not really very Christian, right? And that there's a lot of that, right? And that, people talk about Sir Isaac Newton. Sir Isaac Newton, he was very key, Newtonian physics, and he was key in a lot of the politics that was going on. And he reinvented physics, in England. And he was also probably very influenced by alchemy and Freemasonry. And that despite the fact that he, revolutionized physics, he was a harsh critic of the Catholic Church, a harsh critic of he's a big advocate of Protestantism and breaking England away from feudalism and developing into capitalism. And he was very clearly into some of this pagan stuff. And that was going on, that as, so that's a little bit different also, that as feudalism was being broken apart, you have the emerging capitalist class, they have secret societies, and they have rituals, and they're trying to revive some of the ancient European traditions. And, who knows, maybe nowadays in the West, what we call the occult is kind of a combination of the two, right? You have the Satanism, which is ideological capitalism, basically. Do as thou wilt, no compassion, no kindness, Ayn Rand, that, and then you have this like pagan pre-Christian influence, and that they kind of merge together in this weird entity that we now call the occult in the West. That's really what we call the occult in the West, is a combination of those two things. What's interesting, though, is that the hippie movement makes it even more confusing, right? Because the hippies were considered left-wing, and like, for example, like paganism is very popular among feminists, right? Because, feminists, they talk about matriarchy, they talk about the origin of patriarchy being with private property, and how for the majority of human history there was matriarchy where women had the upper hand. The cult of Mother Goddess, which a lot of hunter-gatherer civilizations worshipped women. So there's a feminist angle on the occult too. So and that feminist occultism. A lot of times you'll even get arguments from feminist occultists. They'll say things like, "Well, women are socialist, men are capitalist, and there's an imbalance, and we're bringing back the balance, and that men are." And that the world needs to be more female, basically, and there's a lot of things that get called occult, I guess. So someone asked about music with occult themes. All of the above. I mean, there's music, there's music with satanic themes. There's music with pre-Christian Wagnerian themes. There's music with feminist, anti-patriarchal themes. There's all kinds of stuff. So what you can call the occult is a very broad category. I am largely opposed to the occult. I think that Christianity is a good thing. I am a Christian, but in addition to that, I favor science. I'm generally opposed to the occult. Not that I feel like there are I view what you can call the Satanist stuff, the Ayn Rand objectivism, which doesn't claim to be religious, Anton LaVey Satanism, and Aleister Crowley stuff. I view that as pure evil. I view that as probably the greatest source of evil. That they are trying to break down all sense of collectivism, grind humanity into atomized individuals. But the other stuff, pre-Christian religions. I mean, if maypoles, is there anything wrong with maypoles? No. I celebrate Christmas, and I celebrate celebrate it in the very in the way that's Germanic paganism. When I was a kid, we had a Christmas tree at my house. I don't see anything wrong with that. There's a lot of. I'm not offended by the pre-Christian paganism so much. I am offended, I would say, by the satanic wing of things. I'm certainly not offended by the feminist wing of things. I understand women wanting to be empowered. When I was in Cleveland, there were some of the political activists I worked with, and they participated. They had like a sisterhood that had feminist pagan rituals. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. If they want to empower women through their rituals, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. So there's different interpretations of what the occult means. So when you ask about music with occult themes, there you go. There you go. I mean, it's many different things. Someone mentioned Skull and Bones. It's a club at Yale, I believe. It's a club at Yale University that the Bush family were in. A lot of the presidents and stuff that come out of Yale, they were in that. And that's, again, it's like a club that does some weird stuff, kind of like Freemasonry, kind of like And again, this stuff doesn't really rule the world, right? As much as I talk about the toxic influence of Ayn Rand's ideology and stuff. Ayn Rand doesn't secretly rule the world. Anton LaVey doesn't secretly rule the world. The Freemasons don't secretly rule the world. The Skull and Bones don't secretly rule the world. There is no Illuminati. The Illuminati was dissolved. The Bavarian Illuminati was dissolved in like the 1700s. So, it's important to talk about the basis of this stuff, but you don't want to go down that like conspiracy theory rabbit hole where it's like, oh, it's all the secret satanic cults that rule the world. It's important to talk about this, though, because the typical response to this stuff, let's be real. So the typical response you get about this stuff from liberals, right, is, now there's a big trend of like the QAnon kind of people, right, that think the world is run by a secret group of satanic pedophiles and all of that. And, so the typical response that liberals give is, you're stupid, you're crazy, the world's not run by that. Well, that's not, no, I mean, there's truth in what they are saying. It's just overall their narrative is wrong, right? That's about it, right? That's what I have to say. And I think that that's the approach that we ought to use, right? When people, if you meet a QAnon person, which I have met many QAnon people, if you meet a QAnon person, and you say to them, well, it's true that many in the ruling class are adherents of, Aleister Crowley or Anton LaVey or Ayn Rand, and that's certainly a satanic philosophy. And yes, these secret societies were key in bringing down feudalism. We can have a conversation about what it is. But just, be honest, that their belief it's all a conspiracy is wrong. It's capitalism. The problem is capitalism. Let me repeat that. The problem is capitalism. The solution is socialism. It's not a big conspiracy. It's not a big conspiracy. If it was a conspiracy, it would work. The problem is it's not a conspiracy. It's the anarchy of production, the chaos of the market. The capitalists cannot control their system. Profits are in command. That's the problem. If it was a conspiracy, it wouldn't have the problem that it has. If you read We Are City Builders, I have a whole section, The Pending Götterdämmerung, where I talk about the irrational nature of the capitalist system, the boom-bust cycle, right? The built-in problem of overproduction, underconsumption, the falling rate of profit, the general law of capitalist accumulation. All of these things point to the fact that it's not a conspiracy. If they were all in control of everything, they just had a big conspiracy, they would solve it. But they're not solving it. Things are getting more and more out of their hands every day. So there you go. Someone said Mongolians favor the USA. Is that true? I don't know anything about that. I've never been to Mongolia. I don't talk to Mongolians regularly, so I don't know about that. All right. Someone said, how do I respond to people who say leftism is equality and mediocrity? Well, look, I really think we need to get this equality stuff out of our heads, okay? Because if I have $10 and 10 people, right, I could divide it equally, and then everyone has $1, right? And what have I achieved there? Everyone's got $1. You know, that the problem with capitalism isn't that some people have more than others, and that's unfair. I mean, there's an element of that, right? That some people, but the issue isn't just that some people have more wealth than others. The issue is that some people control the means of production and are able to make money by having control of the means of production. The rest of us sell our labor to them. And that production is organized for profit, not for social use. We have production for profit rather than production for need, right? And that is the problem. Many people have talked about how at the end of the night, at a restaurant, in many restaurants, they'll take the food and they'll throw it in the garbage. But in New York City, especially where you have a lot of homeless people, before they throw it in the garbage, they'll pour motor oil all over it. So the poor homeless people can't eat it. Why do they do that? Because they didn't make that food so people could eat it. They made that food so they could sell it. Usability is not what it's about. It's about sellability, right? Another great example, right? Good friend of mine, Dakota Lilly, outside the store, there's a Burlington coat factory in the middle of the winter, freezing temperatures. They threw out a whole bunch of coats, put them in the garbage. He saw them throwing it in the garbage. But before they threw them in the garbage, what did they do? They took knives and they cut them up. Why? They didn't make those coats so people could wear them. They made those coats so they could sell them, right? That's capitalism, right? And this is the problem with capitalism, right? Another great example. I was at the movies one time. I didn't realize how expensive the drinks, the sodas, were at the movies. So I said I'd like to have a small soda. They got the cup out, and they said, that'll be $8. And I said, for a soda? $8? And I said, I don't want that. So what did they do? They poured it out, and they threw it in the garbage. Why? That's a waste, right? But they didn't make that soda so I could drink it. They made it so they could sell it. That's capitalism. Production for profit, not for social use. That's capitalism. Okay? And the problem with capitalism is that it is highly irrational and that you have frequent gluts in the market, overproduction, underconsumption, and it's not a rational system. And in order to resolve the problem of capitalism, we need the banks and the factories and the major industries, the means of production, to be publicly owned. We need public ownership of the means of production. And if we can have rational public ownership of the means of production, human creativity and brilliance can be unleashed. It's no longer held back by the irrationality of profits and command. So human beings can invent new things, human beings can work harder than ever before, and we'll get a higher level of everything. And yes, it's going to be more equal in the sense because we all, society as a whole will control the means of production, and wealth will be allocated according to how hard you work. So in that sense, it's more equal, but it's not just that, we have this caricature. I heard this when I was in school. Everyone's heard this, is that communists, they want to divide up everything equally. And that's not true, right? We just want to, we want to redistribute everyone's incomes. That's not what it's about. It's about reorganizing the economy so that profits are not in command. All right. What would a socialist constitution for the USA look like? Well, I think it would probably be thoughts on the possibility of Ukraine attacking Donbass, U.S. confrontation with Russia, and right? I addressed that in the opening, but I will talk about that again, right? Ukraine attacking Donbass. You know, as far as a socialist constitution, I mean, I think we would need a new constitution. I think a new constitutional convention, going through that process would be necessary. I mean, maybe adding, constitutional amendments about an economic bill of rights and the right to a job and stuff. But overall, I think that a lot of things would need to be changed about the U.S. Constitution in order to transition towards socialism, and a new constitutional convention would probably be necessary. All right, drugs as imperialist weapons. Absolutely. There's the Progressive Labor Party, the Maoists or whatever from the 70s. They have a song, you can go find it, Politicians and Pushers. I don't know enough about Marxist. Well, I'll touch on it. I'll touch on it, actually. I'll just touch on Raya and Marxist humanism. All right. But yeah, they had a song, politicians and pushers and police and peddlers and smugglers. Oh, my. When you're flying high, don't you know you can't organize? Yeah, I mean, drugs are not good. I did a whole stream with Ramiro. We did drugs as weapons against us. He reviewed a very important book showing why the imperialists use drugs to divide up working class movements. Heroin was used to oppress the Chinese people. Unemployment rates. Rates in socialist countries. Okay, so, check out the stream I did with Ramiro. I am definitely against drugs. All right. Smear campaigns against pro-Palestine leftists. It happens, right? I mean, there's a huge effort. Look, somebody, I saw that there's like a fake tweet, something I never tweeted, has been like screenshotted and posted around. And even people who don't like me are saying that's not a real tweet. I mean, it's not a real tweet, but they do this. This is how pro-imperialist voices operate. And it's not just pro-Palestine, folks. I mean, look, it happens to people that are anti-imperialist when it comes to issues like Russia and China. It happens to people that are defending Venezuela. And, they're vicious. The pro-imperialist voices on the internet are vicious. I mean, how many personal attacks have I been subject to? It's funny. There's all kinds of people that have said to me, I've heard this over and over and over again. People have said, I heard that you were bad, and then I listened to your streams and I realized I've been lied to, right? If you watch these hit piece videos that Skippy the Bear does, or if you listen to what Jabba the Vosh and all of them say, you would think that I'm Satan, and I just get on here and that I'm on here spewing racism, or I don't know what. You'd think I'm on here advocating violence and fascism or something. I'm on here talking about anti-imperialism and socialism and fighting for the working class. And these people are liars, right? And if you listen to this stream, I'm on here talking about fighting police brutality and working class. These people are vicious, vicious liars, right? They will stop at nothing. I told you there's somebody who made a tweet that's not me and posted it on a few sites. I saw that. It's not me, right? Does that stop them? No. And that's why I'm careful, too. A few people have sent me tweets by people. They sent me a fake tweet one time. It was something that looked like, it was made to look like something that Jabba the Vosh had said. But I said, can we verify this? It's not verified. So I didn't send it out there because it's not verified, right? And, someone could just as easily, look, if someone sends you a screenshot, you got to make sure it's legit, right? There is a fake screenshot. Jabba the Vosh has been very nasty to Luna. I like Luna. But there was a fake screenshot someone sent me, and it just wasn't real, right? I looked at the screenshot. I said, it's not real. I couldn't verify it, so I didn't post it because it's fake. And that's the thing. I don't like Jabba the Vosh, but you don't want to fake these things, right? You want to be honest, right? Criticize people for what they really say, and that's what Jabba the Vosh and Skippy the Bear will never do with me. And and Surfing USA or whatever the hell his name is, Beach Boy Kid or whatever his name is. These people just lie. They just lie, right? If you listen to me for 2 minutes, I'm not a Nazi. I'm not on the right. I'm not an extremist on the far right. I'm not preaching racism. I'm not a crypto Trumper. These people just lie because that's all they've got. They wouldn't have to lie if they had legit arguments against what I was saying. They wouldn't need to lie. They wouldn't need to lie. right? And sometimes their ignorance just comes across. I tweeted that that capitalism is destroying all the important things that conservatives value, like the family, community, etc. And that if you really want to be a conservative, if you really want to preserve these things that communities supposedly value, you should be a socialist. And they lost their minds. Oh my God, it's awful. But a whole bunch of the people that listen to these Jabba the Bosch and Skippy the Bear people, they looked at it and they said, well, actually, that's true. In fact, that's the whole opening of the Communist Manifesto is about that, And it's like these people they've never read the Communist Manifesto. They don't know that, right? These people are they're hacks, they're shills. I think they've been recruited. I think some of them may have been recruited from central casting, honestly. It's like, have any of them, have they ever been to a socialist event? Have they ever been to a demonstration? I get the impression they weren't recruited from the DSA. They weren't recruited from the anarchist black bloc. I think they were recruited from central casting, right? And look at their backgrounds. It's a little interesting. A lot of them come from some kind of show business background, not some kind of activist background. And you almost wonder if there's if the ruling class went to central casting and they said, hey, who can be our next, we need a fake socialist who'll get on the internet and who'll, and they studied for the part and they auditioned and they got the job. That's what it looks like. It's like you look at some of it's a common pattern. A lot of them have, Hollywood relatives and they were making movie reviews beforehand or something. And then all of a sudden they just, suddenly and then the algorithms just shoot them ahead. All of a sudden they're all over YouTube. And it's like, if you want to be a socialist, you must agree with Jabba the Vosh. Little sketch now, isn't it, right? Little interesting, isn't it, right? It's, but hey, I guess he did well in his audition, right? There you go. It's like, I don't wonder about all of this, right? And no one's ever met these people. No one's ever seen them at a demonstration. The left used to be much, much smaller, right? Much smaller, right? Left Forum, right? I used to go to the Left Forum and I would, Richard Wolff would be there. Michael Hudson would be there. Chris Hedges would be there, and they'd all be there, and you could see them, and, every Maoist and Trotskyite group was there shaking hands with, I never saw any of these people. I'll just be real. I never saw any of these people. Never saw Skippy the Bear there. He's older than me. I never saw him at the Left Forum. Guess he's Canadian, so maybe he went to the Canadian Left Forum. No one, never saw Jabba the Vosh. I guess he's young, so he wasn't born yet, or I don't know. Little interesting, who the big name DSAers are. You never see these people just kind of out of nowhere they appear, right? It's a little interesting. And the same true with, AOC. She just kind of came out of nowhere, right? I met her a few times before she got big, but it was like she came out of nowhere. A lot of these people, and then there's like weird things about them too. If you dig up, there's like, there's some questions, it's just, but it doesn't, at the end of the day, none of this stuff really matters. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. Okay. We're just going to do our thing. And that's all we can do is do our thing. We got to just do our thing. And that's what we can do. We have the truth on our side. We are anti-imperialists. We actually understand this ideology. We're not playing a part. We're not actors. Look, it's funny. I am really like this. If you ever meet me in life, I am exactly like I am on here. I am exactly like I am on here. This is not a character. I'm not on here playing a character. You ever had dinner with me? Anyone will tell you who knows me, folks who used to live with me or whatever, I am exactly like I am, in real life. So I'm not playing a character. I'm on here keeping it real with you. This is who I am, right? I'm a bookish guy who believes in communism and hates imperialism with all his heart and soul. Yeah, there you go. That's who I am. And, didn't get hired to do this for central casting, I'll tell you that much. I was running through the streets of New York City with Occupy Wall Street and protesting and all of this. I've been, and people say, well, you only say that because you work for a Russian company. No, I was talking this way before I ever worked for a Russian company. Long before, when I was back in Cleveland, I had long hair and a beard. I was waving Soviet flags and screaming about communism. And I've always been this way. This is who I really am. This is not a grift. This is not a put on. This is me. This is who I am. And many people can attest to that. Anyone who's ever met me or worked with me. So, whatever. But, what it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at the end of the day. We just got to keep doing our thing, keep building our real community. And the fact that they attack us. And you have to remember, every attack on me is an attack on you. Okay, let's be real. It's an attack on me, sure, but it's an attack on all of you. Because all of you are here every night watching me. And you know that I'm legit, and you know that I'm not a racist, right? But according to them, you're on here cheering for the Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, right? You're on here, I'm clearly like the next Hitler, and you're on here, cheering for me. So that's really an attack on you, and you have to think of it that way. When they attack me, they're actually attacking you, because I wouldn't, I could talk into this thing and no one would watch me. But really, they're attacking you. It's a personal attack on you. Every time they call me a fascist, every time they call me a Nazbol and all of that, they're actually attacking you personally. They're saying that you are so stupid that you clearly can't tell that I am David Duke. You are so stupid. You can't tell that I am on here, Ku Klux Klanning every night, and you are just so dumb you can't tell it. That's what they're saying to you. So you have to remember it. I mean, I would be more angry about it if I was one of you than if I was me. I expect it, right? I'm used to this, right? I've dealt with liars and phonies and, deep state operations and that kind of thing my whole life. But if I was one of you, if I was one of the loyal listeners to this program, somebody who's bought We Are City Builders and all that, I would get really mad at these people. I would say, my God, do they really think I'm stupid? I mean, do they really think that I can't tell who is on the right and who is not? Just saying. Just saying. Oh boy. All right. Okay. Chinese famines caused by imperialism. Yeah, there were 2 opium wars in which the British seized control of Chinese economy, wouldn't allow China to develop its own industries, and that led to all kinds of economic famines in China. And no one ever talks about this. They talk about the Great Leap Forward famine because it has political value. They're demonizing the Chinese Communist Party, so they talk about it, right? They talk about the the Cultural Revolution, but under British domination, there was starvation in China all the time. Every year there was at least some malnutrition. And, 1928, you had the horrible famine that Edgar Snow witnessed in China, just horrible, people starving. What else? I mean, you had throughout the 1890s, all the time, all the time, all the time you had horrendous famines in China, all the time. And, they don't talk about that because it doesn't have political value. It was caused by capitalism and imperialism, so it doesn't count. Doesn't count. And that's, when they give you this big number, communism killed a million people. No one ever adds up all the people that have starved in famines created by capitalism. Oh, it's not real capitalism. So, there you go. Most evil U.S. presidents. I think our 2 most evil presidents were Ronald Reagan and Jimmy Carter. Ronald Reagan, he backed the Contras in Nicaragua, the drug-dealing narcos, and the death results of that, of the fact that the U.S. government set up drug-dealing terrorist gangs in Central America are still going on. I mean, the results are still continuing. Ronald Reagan, with the war on drugs, at the same time he's funding drug dealers, he's also setting up a prison industrial complex and waging a war against the black community, supposedly in the name of fighting drugs. He got it both ways. So fund the drug dealers and also terrorize the black community in the name of fighting drugs. Awful president. Escalates the arms race, fights organized labor, just vicious anti-labor president, using Taft-Hartley to break the air traffic controllers union. Just waging war on labor unions and playing up the myth of the welfare mother, escalating racism, using racist, dog whistles to push for cuts in government spending. Ronald Reagan was an awful president. Jimmy Carter, from a left-wing perspective, also awful, right? He starts the Afghan trap, right? And, forces the Soviet Union to have to intervene in Afghanistan and then boycotts the Olympics to condemn it, right? He brings Paul Volcker in to overturn all the government regulations. It used to be a lot of states had usury laws that you couldn't, lend money at a certain rate of money. But Paul Volcker comes in and he overturns all of that. Awful, awful, and he really into the Taft-Hartley. He's really into the overpopulation stuff. He says abscam, and he sends the FBI with abscam to go after the labor union Democrats, and to just crush the more progressive wing of his own party and push his no growth environmental agenda of driving wages down. Yeah. Have I ever met Norm Finkelstein? I have. Yes, I have. Yes, I have. Actually, on 2 occasions, I have met Norman Finkelstein. So yes, that answers your question. On 2 occasions, I have met him. One time, I interviewed him at a protest he was doing. Another time, I was at a place he was doing an interview. So yes, I answered that question. I have met Norman Finkelstein. All right. Didn't have to write it down. I just answered it right there. All right. How do we say a revolution doesn't create a new ruling class? Well, it's important to talk about what a ruling class is. Okay. Now, this is an important point. What is a ruling class? Now, if you understand this in a simplistic way, if a ruling class is just, oh, a group of people that has more money or privilege than anybody else, a group of people that influence the government more than other people, well, then, yeah, I mean, and until we get to like full communism, there's going to be some people who have more influence on government, some people have more money than other people. No, we're talking about, when you talk about a ruling class, you're talking about a group of people who control the means of production, and the economy is operated for their benefit at the expense of others. And by putting the means of production under the control of all of society and having the state force the means of production to no longer simply operate on the basis of profit, you can get rid of that. Central bank and communism, not the Fed. Okay, all right. I'm glad you're asking this, actually. Bank, not the Fed. All right. Okay. We're just getting right through these. Okay. Next question. Audiobook recommendations. You know, the autobiography of Ulysses S. Grant, full audiobook online. It's great. Communist Manifesto. You can listen to that. It's great. You can listen to, there's a lot of like really progressive stuff you can listen to in terms of audiobooks. I think there's a lot of labor union oriented stuff. You can listen to like Mother Bloor and there's a lot of really good audiobooks out there from a left wing perspective. You can listen to, I believe you can listen to Looking Backward by Edward Bellamy, the classic American socialist novel. Yeah, a lot of good stuff out there on audiobooks. Absolutely. And Tristan, Parasocialite, has an audiobook of We Are City Builders on his channel. He has read the entire opening essay of We Are City Builders, all 100 pages of it. He's read out loud on his channel, Parasocialite. So go check that out. Shout out to you, Tristan. I'm going to edit it together for this channel eventually. All right. The role of the police and the military in protecting socialism. Well, look, obviously, in order to have a socialist society, you would need a new military, new policing agencies. This is what Lenin writes about in the book The State and Revolution. You have to change the nature of the state, right? You couldn't have the FBI and CIA and Pentagon operate the same way they do now and have socialism. Wouldn't work, right? I mean, they're there to serve capital. These are institutions that have been cultivated to serve capital. So it wouldn't work. You have to build new institutions. You have to change the nature of the state. You have to transform the state from being a capitalist state to a proletarian state. Allergies. All right. Someone asked about Dave Rubin. They asked, it was like 3 names that they asked about. And I'll just give you a quick answer to all of them. Dave Rubin, right-wing podcast guy, don't watch his show very much. Candace Owens, typical neocon, PragerU, says a lot of dumb things, not interesting. All right, Jordan Peterson doesn't know anything about communism, self-help advice, it's, interesting from a psychological perspective, but overall he knows absolutely nothing about communism and politics, and he's so embarrassingly wrong, it's infuriating. Kamala Harris, read my book. Read my book on Kamala Harris. Wrote a whole book about her. Go read my book on Kamala Harris. All right. Okay. Did you really have to wait 10 years in the USSR for an apartment and a car? I don't think you did. That's a joke that Ronald Reagan told. There was universal housing in the USSR. So I really doubt, that was the case. All right. Was the moon landing fake? I don't think it was fake. No, I think the moon landing was real. Next question. Material conditions in the USA get worse. Why no revolution? Because a revolution requires 3 things. In order to have a revolution, you must have a serious, crisis in society, which we have, in which people are widely questioning the right of the ruling class to rule. On top of that, you then must have serious rebellions and upheavals among the population. And we're starting to see that. We're not really seeing that, but we're getting toward that. I mean, we're seeing that somewhat, but nowhere near on the scale it could be. And then thirdly, you need a revolutionary organization that can, transform the revolutionary struggles of the people and the uprisings and the crisis into a seizure of power. So we have number one for sure. We kind of have number two, but not really. And number three, we don't have. We definitely do not have a revolutionary organization in the United States. So that's what you need to have a revolution. The economic crisis is is advancing, and people are getting poorer. That's leading to the rebellions among the people. But again, this is what is to be done by Vladimir Lenin is all about. Spontaneously, it won't happen. It requires the intervention of a revolutionary vanguard, right? You need conscious revolutionaries to make it happen, right? It's not Che Guevara. He said that, revolution is not an apple that just falls from the tree. You have to make it fall, right? And that this is what people do not understand, right? Revolutionaries require, revolutions require conscious revolutionary actors. And we don't have that right now. We have a crazy, confused, we have the wreckage of what's left over from times past, and we have the synthetic left. But we don't have a conscious group that understands what's happening now. And that's why I'm building the Center for Political Innovation, because no one understands what's happening now. The analysis of the communist groups, they don't understand what happened at the fall of the Soviet Union. They don't understand what's happening with China now and what's happening with the anti-imperialist bloc around the world and Bolivarianism, right? They don't understand, I have a new analysis, a new understanding that is largely missing. Around the world, what I say is not particularly unique. People in the developing world, communist groups, Asia and Latin America, they know all this stuff. The United States, nobody talks the way I do. Because I am talking about what went wrong and why American communists are so confused, and we need to build a real community of socialist education to lay the basis for actually getting to socialism in America. All right. What do I think about shaming on the basis of weight, height, or intelligence? Be nice. Be nice. That's what I think. Be nice. Be nice. All right. How do we get rural people into communism? Get them to understand it is in their economic interest, right? When people are struggling economically, right, you need them to understand why, right? And you need to build a structure that cares for people that are suffering, but also educates them and gives them a new ideology. If you can do both of those things, if you can provide relief to people, but also provide them with education, things can change. What will not change them? Shaming them, attacking them. Wouldn't work. All right. Why did Gorbachev surrender, and did Chernobyl lead to Glasnost? Well, Chernobyl, my understanding, again, I wasn't there, but my understanding is that Chernobyl, there was some feeling, that Chernobyl revealed some problems in the Soviet bureaucracy and the way it functioned. Gorbachev, though, represented a wing of the Soviet bureaucracy that had, been completely cultivated by American intelligence, right? The U.S. ruling class worked very, very hard to convince a large section of the Soviet Communist Party, especially its younger members, that U.S. imperialism was not their enemy. And Gorbachev believed that. And he came in and he, watered down Marxism. I mean, he denounced Marxism-Leninism, basically. And he thought Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher were great people. And he was westernized, right? You have to remember, in the Soviet system, there was not open debate. What went wrong, you say? I don't know what that means. But, there was not open debate. Everyone had to mouth the party line. But within the Soviet Communist Party, there were a lot of people who didn't believe in communism and were just in there to promote, to advance or whatever. And so, beneath the surface, there were other trends in the Soviet Communist Party. Gorbachev represented the westernized trend that was very widespread in the 1980s within the Soviet bureaucracy. There was a section of the Soviet bureaucracy that thought the West was all right and was compromised. All right. Who were the Iran hostages? That was in 1979. The Iranians seized the embassy. The U.S. embassy, in Iran was seized by, allies of Khomeini and the Islamic Revolution because they believed, and they were proven correct, the United States was trying to foment ethnic unrest in Iran. It was trying to encourage Kurdish and Arab separatists to rise up against the Iranian government. And it was trying to destabilize Iran in the aftermath of the Islamic Revolution. So these radical students, the students taking Imam's line, they were called, seized the government building. And they held they released all the black people in the building, and they released all the women except for the ones that were CIA agents, and they held them there as hostages. And it was the Iran hostage crisis, very famous. Oh, very good question. Why is big tech left leaning? Big tech left leaning. All right. Okay. Outsourcing to China. Jobs are not being outsourced to China now. That's old news, my friend. You're way behind. Outsourcing to China that's like an 80s thing, right? That's just not happening right now. All right. Ukraine attacking Donbass. Yes, I believe that the strategy on the part of the United States right now is to try and provoke a situation where Russia is forced to intervene to protect the people of Donbass as Ukraine continues shelling them. And then they'll be able to accuse Russia of aggression. Much like the strategy of the United States right now is to provoke a situation where China is forced to retake Taiwan, right? And the Chinese mainland is forced to retake Taiwan, and then they can say China is aggressive, right? This is how Brzezinski, this is their geopolitical game, this is how it works. It's unfortunate. Marxist humanism. I have no interest in Marxist humanism because at the time I have talked with people from that tendency, Marxist humanist initiative, people that are associated with that, Raya, what's her name? Oh, what went wrong with fall of USSR? What? With fall of USSR. Raya, what her name is, and they're pro-imperialist. They're pro-imperialist. I mean, they think that the intervention in Libya was good, that Gaddafi was an evil dictator. They think that that U.S. imperialism is a progressive force. Every regime the U.S. imperialists tell us to hate, they hate. They support every revolution that CNN says to support. They really hate, quote unquote, tankies. So I've just had no interest. I see it as it's one of these Trotskyite variants, and I'm not interested in it. So there you go. I mean, yeah, they would come to Occupy Wall Street and hand out their stuff, and I had very heated arguments with them at various points. They're just one of these Trotskyite, variants. Not interesting to me. All right. Unemployment rates in socialist countries. Well, usually there's, universal employment in socialist states. In situations where you have more of a market mixed economy, it's not that simple. But generally in socialist countries, if you want a job, you can find one. The kind of chronic unemployment of communities where people don't have jobs, that's you don't have that in socialist countries, in socialist planned economies. Taft-Hartley. The Taft-Hartley labor law was a law passed in 1948 that severely restricts unions and labor unions in the United States. One thing that it does is it very, very harshly restricts, you can't have solidarity strikes. You can only go on strike for things in your own workplace, number one. Number two, you don't have automatic unionization. They used to have card check. It used to be that if 51% of the employees at any company signed a document saying they wanted to join a union, that they were unionized. Well, now, oh no, you have to have a union election that often takes up to 2 years, and it's a very painful process in which companies can fight the union like crazy. Taft-Hartley also outlaws union boycotts. Unions are not allowed to boycott companies and organize boycotts against companies. Taft-Hartley it's an awful law and it allows the president to call off strikes, to declare strikes to be over with a cooling off period. It's one of the most harsh anti-labor laws in the Western world. I mean, it basically ties the hands of labor unions so they can't fight for their rights. It was to prevent something like the 1930s from ever happening again, to prevent something like Roosevelt and the Communist Party USA from ever happening again. They passed the Taft-Hartley law. The Communist Party called it the Taft-Hartley Slave Labor Bill. And I think that's pretty, it's a pretty great example. I mean, it basically ties the hands of unions, makes it very, very hard for unions to organize for workers' rights. All kinds of things that are basic to the union movement, like boycotts, they're not allowed to do anymore. All right. So central bank, not the Fed. This is a silly thing libertarians say all the time, right? They say, oh, look, the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto, right? And that's the thing. First of all, You know, Marx says these conditions will be different in every country, but generally speaking, in 1848, at the time the manifesto was published, he lists like 10 planks of, 10 ideas that communists advocated in 1848. You know, public education, gradual income tax, etc. One of them is a central bank. Now, by central bank, Marx means government control of the lending of money. He means bank as in lending institution that is, and it says central bank, centralization of credit in the hands of the state. That means the government has a monopoly on lending money. That is not what the Federal Reserve is. The Federal Reserve is not a state monopoly on lending of money. There are private banks all over the United States. There's credit unions, there's big banks, little banks, you got Chase Bank, you got TD Bank, you got HSE. So I don't understand how libertarians can look at that and think that the Federal Reserve is, oh, it's in the Communist Manifesto. It's like, no. The Federal Reserve prints money. The Federal Reserve, props up. It's like a government bank that props up, other banks and like tries to stabilize the economy. The Federal Reserve is not state control of banking. It's not centralization of credit in the hands of the state. We have a private banking system. And even the Federal Reserve is a private bank. Even though it's propped up by the government and assigned by the government with the purpose of printing our money, even the Federal Reserve is private. We live in a fucking libertarian paradise here in the United States. No country in the Western world is anywhere near as libertarian as the United States is. We have really low labor protections. They're unpaving the roads in various parts of the country. We got schools for profit. We got prisons for profit. We got private military contractors. I don't understand why libertarians aren't the happiest people in the world. They should be delighted. No country in the Western world is more libertarian than the United States is. The United States is a libertarian paradise, right? It is. Ayn Rand would never have dreamed. If you would have told Ayn Rand when she died, we're going to privatize the army. We're going to have millions of poor people locked up in prisons, and companies will get paid to lock them in jail. Hey, if you had, what other country in the world do we have the money, the currency printed by a private for-profit corporation? Right? The market rules in the United States. The market overwhelmingly rules. So how these libertarians, they look at things, they're like, oh, the Federal Reserve is a bank, and the Communist Manifesto calls for a central bank. And so it's like the Communist Manifesto calls for state control of the banking system, meaning the government decides who gets lended money and who doesn't. It doesn't call for a private corporation to print our money. That's just like, it's infuriating. It's like with libertarianism, there's a huge amount of I want to believe, right? I want to believe, and I will not learn anything about communism, right? It's like, you say to a libertarian, you say to them, actually, when he calls about a central bank, like the centralization of credit in the hands of the state, and they just sit there, blah, 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 don't, blah, 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 you're an evil communist, I'm not listening, oh, that's just what they do, right? It requires a huge amount of ignorance, right? And then they just repeat stuff, it's not true. Communism failed everywhere it's ever been tried. Sputnik, millions raised out of poverty in China. It's just, it requires, you have to really turn your brain off. I'm sorry, but it's like, that's a classic libertarian talking point. I heard all the time from libertarians. The Federal Reserve is the fifth plank of the Communist Manifesto. It's so clearly not. But if you want to believe, I can't stop you. Sorry to get angry there. It infuriates me. It really infuriates me, right? It really, really infuriates me, right? People have no interest in arguing against what you actually believe. They argue against a caricature of it. This USA is a libertarian paradise. Libertarians should wake up every day so happy. Think of all the children in the United States whose food stamps have been cut off. It's amazing, right? Poor, inferior rabble are starving. Exactly what libertarians want. Think of all the people who are, for years in student debt, because private, got to pay for college. We don't give it to people like other countries, right? Again, that's exactly what libertarians want, right? This is exactly the libertarian blueprints that they've dreamed up. They have been implemented very, very largely throughout U.S. society. Why is big tech left-leaning? Um, Big tech, it's actually a lot of big tech are libertarians economically. That's just a fact. Silicon Valley is crawling with Ayn Rand thinkers and adherents of objectivism and such. But big tech tends to be socially liberal. That is true. And that's largely because of this divide, right? I've talked about the divide between big capital and lower levels of capital. And the ultra rich, fighting to stabilize the economy against kind of an insurgency by the lower levels of capital. I've talked about the Yankee and Cowboy War. And yes, Silicon Valley favors a more managerial approach. They want a more stable society where they get to be the stabilizers. The hero of Mark Zuckerberg is Caesar Augustus, who created Pax Romana. He created world peace by ruling the world. And it's very openly stated by Mark Zuckerberg that he sees himself as the new Roman emperor. He wants to rule the world and create peace by being the ruler of the world, right? This is how they see things. So, yeah, they have the more managerial, liberal, social engineering view. That prevails among the Rockefellers, the ultra-rich, and the intelligence agencies. Whereas the lower levels of capital, they tend to favor a more open, entrepreneurial approach. And this is the divide between capitalists that I talk about quite a bit. I talk about it quite a bit, this divide between the ultra-rich and the lower levels of capital. The Trump supporters, the Trump-supporting capitalists, Betsy DeVos, Bernie Marcus, the fracking companies versus the ultra-rich, the big oil super majors, the four super majors, ExxonMobil, BP, Shell, and Chevron, the tech giants, the Council on Foreign Relations. There's a divide in our ruling class. The Yankee and Cowboy War by Carl Oglesby and the Kamala Harris book, I go into great detail about this divide. There is a big divide in the ruling class, and Silicon Valley is on the Joe Biden side. Watch my video, who is Joe Biden, who is behind Joe Biden. There you go. What went wrong with the fall of the Soviet Union? Well, here's what went wrong with the fall of the Soviet Union. It's that, the Soviet Union, you have to remember, was never given a moment of peace. Never was the Soviet Union given a moment of peace. It was always under attack. It was always facing opposition and surrounded. And as a result, it became a very authoritarian society out of necessity. It was fighting for its life. And as the Soviet Union became a more authoritarian society, it had difficulties, right? And it needed to adjust in order to maintain socialism. In the 1970s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, it became very clear that they needed to adjust their socialist system, right? And they were unable to do so, right? The way the Soviet model had been set up, there was kind of an entrenched bureaucracy, and there wasn't open debate about the way things needed to operate, and it needed to change, but it was unable to change. So, as the 80s set in, there was a feeling that the country needed to change, but there was not widespread debate about how to do it. And most of the feelings and the discussions about how to change Soviet society, Karin, were taking place behind closed doors, right? They were taking place in secret. And there were really two wings. There were what they called the conservative communists, and those were folks in the Soviet Communist Party who were admirers of Stalin, usually, and but they started to become more and more kind of Orthodox Russian nationalists, right? That as much as they loved Stalin, as much as they defended the Soviet history, and as much as they mouthed ML in public, they were more nationalistic and Orthodox and conservative, right? And that was one layer that was developing within the bureaucracy, within the KGB. And then you had this other faction that were the liberals, the westernized faction. And they were folks that were, again, they mouthed Marxism, Leninism in public, but they were mouthing in private, they were in awe of the West. They thought the United States and Western capitalism was amazing. And that was kind of the divide between the beneath the surface in the Soviet Union, you had the conservative opposition, and then you had the westernized faction. And there was not open debate. And so, the conservative folks, you had the most powerful people in the bureaucracy, the people who'd been through World War II, and all that. As Brezhnev is dying, Andropov is dying. You then have the rise. Gorbachev comes in, and he's the first guy who's not from the generation, that led the Soviet Union in its hard years. And he comes in, and he's a westernized guy, and he's very much a westernized guy. And then you had the attempted coup against him, where the military, the conservative folks and the military kidnapped him, basically, to try and stop him from doing what he did. And it all led to the fall of the Soviet Union. The main thing was that there was a whole layer of people within Soviet society. There was a whole layer of people who felt stifled, right? Doctors, lawyers, teachers, intellectuals, scientists, right? Those kind of people, they couldn't start their own business. They couldn't get ahead. They felt like their skills were being suppressed, right? They weren't able to go out and achieve things, right? You needed to have market reforms in the USSR. You needed to enable those kind of people to start their own businesses, etc. And you needed to then maintain an ideological communist party. And they did neither of those things. They, you had all these people who felt stuck, but you had a party that beneath the surface was not very ideological. You scratched the surface in the 80s. The Soviet Communist Party, a lot of them didn't believe in Marxism-Leninism. They were either westernized or they were the conservative opposition. So the leadership of the country didn't believe in communism on the one side. On the other side, you have a big layer of intellectuals and folks that were very frustrated with the system, and all of that led to a collapse. China, on the other hand, adjusted, right? They were having the same problems. In the Cultural Revolution, it was the same kind of problems they were having. But China, you had Deng Xiaoping, and you had the great opening up and reform and opening up. So you let all these intellectuals and scientists and people like that go start their own businesses. And on top of that, you maintained the party as an ideological core, right? There was a huge ideological, coming out of the Cultural Revolution, the Chinese Communist Party was a very, very ideological organization. So the party still believed in communism, number one. And number two, you had a reform and opening up. And things changed. But yes, the fall of the Soviet Union was primarily a result of the conditions Soviet society faced for decades and decades. But those conditions gave rise to political forms that were unchanging, right? That the Soviet Union was unable to have political reform. In order for any system to survive, you need to be able to have political reform, right? If you can't change your system, it will die, because the world, as we know, as Marxists, as dialectical materialists, A does not equal A. All things in the universe are in a constant state of change. A does not equal A. That is the foundation of Marxist dialectics, right? In my video, What is Dialectical Materialism? I talk about this. And so the Soviet Union did not have proper mechanisms for their system to change, because over the course of World War II, over the course of all that they had been through, there was never really a moment where, they became a very entrenched system. And after a while, they couldn't bend, so they broke. And that's what happened. And it was a disaster. The fall of the Soviet Union was an economic nightmare. And again, according to libertarians, should have been paradise, right? They should have brought in the free market and everyone should have got wealthier. That's not what happened. Things got better after the fall of the Soviet Union when Putin reasserted state control over oil and natural gas and centralized the economy once again around the state. So yeah, capitalism is a nightmare. Socialism, it needed to change. So there you go. That's the situation. Now I'm asked how I view Bukharin. Well, Bukharin was the right oppositionist, right? At the time, of the death of Lenin, there were three wings of the Soviet Communist Party. You had the Trotskyites that were pushing permanent revolution, and they wanted to make the USSR just a temporary holdout, and militarize it as a temporary holdout to spread communism all throughout the world. You had, Bukharin, and Bukharin was saying we need to sign treaties with the West, and it was, they called it the right opposition. And Stalin was in the middle. Originally, Stalin was with Bukharin against Trotsky, but then Stalin broke with Bukharin as well. Stalin was for socialism in one country. Bukharin said the USSR was too poor to have socialism, so that they should maintain the new economic policy and free market kind of stuff until enough wealth had come into the USSR they could build socialism. That was Bukharin. And Trotsky was for permanent revolution, and Stalin was for the 5-year economic plans, right? The 5-year plans to rapidly industrialize the USSR. And it worked. Stalin's, socialism in one country, it worked pretty well. It worked very, very well, socialism in one country. They rapidly, no country had ever come as far as the USSR had. That rapid industrialization that they experienced, it was pretty big. So, but there you go. That was, Bukharin. Bukharin was the right opposition. Trotsky was the left opposition. Okay. All right. And on that note, folks, I think we're going to cut it off here. It's been fun. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression, but the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, the people of all countries must get prepared. Revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. And we need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families.